It was one of those evenings when the sky painted itself in gentle shades of lavender and deep blue, the kind of night that invited peace. The air, soft and cool, carried a sweet scent of pine and wildflowers from the nearby woods. Max sat on the porch of his little cabin, tucked away on the edge of the forest, just a few miles from the nearest town. He'd always been drawn to the tranquility of the forest, the way the trees seemed to hum with life, yet everything around him was still. It wasn't just the whispering winds through the branches that calmed him. It was the deep connection he felt to the earth beneath his feet, a connection that made him feel more at home with each passing day. Max had moved here a year ago, seeking solace after a tumultuous time in his life. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving behind the bright city lights and the constant hum of technology, the noise of life, felt daunting at first. But something in him had yearned for the peace the countryside promised. And so, with nothing more than a few bags packed and an open mind, he made his way to this remote cabin, far from the world he once knew. The house had been standing here for decades, a weathered yet sturdy structure that had clearly withstood the test of time. The wood was dark and smooth, each plank telling a story of its own, and the roof was shingled in a charming, uneven way that gave the cabin character. Max loved it. It was small but cozy, a perfect retreat. Tonight, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Max couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over him. There were no cars rushing past, no phone buzzing in his pocket, no deadlines waiting for him. Only the soft rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional crackle of the fire he'd started in the pit. He let out a long breath and settled into his chair, watching the flames flicker and dance in the fire. There was something hypnotic about it, the way the fire seemed to move with a life of its own, illuminating the surrounding darkness. The forest was alive with sounds, the creaking of old branches, the call of insects, the quiet rustle of a squirrel running along the ground. But above it all, the most enchanting sound was the whisper of the wind weaving through the trees. Max had learned to listen closely to the whispers of the forest, as if each gust carried a message meant just for him. He felt the forest speaking to him in its own language, a language of tranquility and timelessness. It was as though the woods had always been here, watching over the land, offering their wisdom to those who took the time to listen. As the night deepened, Max felt his eyelids grow heavy, the warmth of the fire and the peaceful sounds of the forest lulling him into a state of relaxation. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the cool night air and the scent of the pine trees. His mind began to drift, no longer weighed down by the worries of the world. The stress and tension that had once filled his days seemed to melt away with each passing second. A soft breeze brushed his face, and Max felt as if the forest itself were embracing him, wrapping him in a cocoon of serenity. For the first time in a long while, he truly felt at peace. The kind of peace that came when you were no longer running, no longer chasing after the next big thing. It was the peace of simply being. The fire crackled softly, sending out a few more dancing embers into the air. Max sat in silence, the cool night air washing over him, a perfect companion to the flickering warmth of the flames. He let his thoughts wander, not to the stresses of his past life, but to the present moment. The present, where nothing mattered but the gentle rhythm of the earth and the night. As he sat there, gazing up at the stars, a subtle shift in the atmosphere caught his attention. The breeze, which had been gentle and soothing, suddenly took on a deeper tone. It wasn't the normal rustling of leaves that Max had become so accustomed to. It was more like a whisper, soft but insistent, coming from deeper within the woods. Max wasn't startled. In fact, the sensation felt oddly familiar, like a memory that hadn't fully formed yet, a feeling that something or someone was calling him. It was an invitation to explore the forest further, to walk deeper into its secrets. He stood up slowly, not feeling a sense of alarm, but a sense of curiosity. It wasn't the first time the forest had seemed to speak to him this way. At first, he had thought it was just his imagination, the kind of thing that happens when you're alone with your thoughts for too long. But as time went on, he realized that the woods had a way of communicating with him, of pulling him into their ancient rhythm. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, and Max felt an overwhelming urge to follow it. It wasn't a voice, not in the way people usually heard voices. It was more like a sensation, like the rustling of leaves forming into a soft murmur that he could feel in his chest, a call that seemed to resonate in his very bones. He grabbed his lantern from the porch and, with the flame casting a soft glow in the dark, made his way down the gravel path that led into the woods. The trees were tall and strong, their trunks thick with age. The air was cooler here, the shadows deeper. It felt like the forest was alive with its own mysteries. Each step Max took bringing him closer to something he couldn't yet name. The path he followed was one he had walked many times before. It wasn't far from his cabin, just a short trek into the heart of the woods. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, the forest seemed to welcome him in a way it never had before. The trees leaned in closer, as if guiding him, their branches stretching toward him in a gentle embrace. Max's steps were slow and deliberate, his lantern casting long shadows on the ground. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he felt a sense of purpose, as though he were meant to be there, at this very moment, walking deeper into the woods. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, the hum of the forest filling his ears. After a while, the path began to narrow, the trees growing closer together, their branches forming a canopy overhead. It felt almost like a tunnel, a living, breathing passage that led further into the heart of the forest. And as he walked, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just the rustling of leaves anymore. No, now the whispers had a rhythm to them, a pattern that Max could almost understand. It was as if the forest were singing a song, one that only those who listened closely could hear. Max paused, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing the melody of the forest to wash over him. There was something deeply calming about it, something primal. As he opened his eyes, he noticed a small clearing ahead, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The trees here were older, their bark twisted and gnarled with age, the roots snaking out from the ground like ancient hands reaching toward the sky. And at the center of the clearing, there was something that caught Max's eye. It was a stone, not large but smooth and round, with intricate carvings etched into its surface. The carvings seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, faintly glowing as if they held a secret, one that had been kept for centuries. Max walked closer, his heart beating a little faster now. There was something undeniable about the stone, something that felt sacred, as though it had been waiting for him. He knelt down beside it, the soft grass cool beneath his knees. His fingers traced the carvings, feeling the grooves and patterns that seemed to pulse with life. It wasn't just the stone that called to him. It was the whole clearing, the way the trees stood in reverence, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. It was a place of stillness, of quiet power, where time seemed to slow down. Max didn't know why, but he felt that this was a place he was meant to find. A place that had always been here, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to understand. The whispers were no longer just the wind. They were the forest itself, sharing its ancient stories with him. He sat down beside the stone, his back resting against a nearby tree, the cool earth beneath him grounding him in the present. He closed his eyes, allowing the forest's melody to fill his mind, the whispers becoming more like a lullaby than a call. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the ancient trees, Max felt something deep within him stir. It was a connection, a bond that transcended time, a recognition of the forest's timeless wisdom. It was as if the woods had always known him, had always been waiting for him to return, to listen, to understand. And as the whispers of the night wrapped around him like a gentle embrace, Max allowed himself to surrender to the peace that filled the clearing. In that moment, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Max sat there for what felt like hours, his fingers still resting lightly on the smooth stone, his mind drifting with the whispers of the forest. The world around him seemed to disappear, replaced by a deep sense of tranquility that enveloped him like a warm blanket. The forest, in all its ancient glory, felt like a living entity, a place where time had no power, where everything was connected by the invisible threads of nature. As he sat, his thoughts became quieter, his breath deeper. He felt as though he were no longer a mere observer of the world, but part of it. A small thread in the vast, ever-weaving tapestry of life. The night around him seemed to grow even more still, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, just as he was about to close his eyes and surrender completely to the peace of the moment, he felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a feeling that he was not alone. Max opened his eyes slowly, scanning the darkened edges of the clearing. The trees were tall and shadowy, their silhouettes swaying gently in the breeze. But there was something different tonight. It wasn't the usual night sounds of insects or the distant call of an owl. No, there was an unusual silence now, as if the creatures of the forest were holding their collective breath. Max's gaze lingered on the trees, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. For a moment, he could have sworn that the shadows between the trunks were darker, denser, as if they were watching him, observing his every move. His mind told him it was just the play of light and darkness, but something deeper in his gut told him it was more than that. A soft rustle broke the silence, and Max's eyes snapped to the movement. But there was nothing, just the faintest stir of leaves. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something ancient and knowing, hidden just beyond the trees. The feeling was both unsettling and strangely comforting. It was as if the forest itself was not just alive, but sentient, aware of his presence, aware of his purpose here. The thought of being watched was disconcerting, but at the same time, there was an odd sense of being protected, as though the forest had been waiting for him, guiding him into this moment. Max took a slow breath, steadying his nerves. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. He had come to the woods seeking peace, and peace was what he had found. But now, the deeper layers of the forest seemed to be revealing themselves to him, layers he hadn't known existed. It was as if the veil between the known and the unknown had thinned, and he was on the cusp of understanding something profound. He rose to his feet slowly, the stone still warm beneath his fingers. His lantern swung lightly in his hand, casting long, flickering shadows across the ground. For a brief moment, Max considered heading back to the safety of his cabin, where the world was simpler, where he could lock the door and let the night pass in comfort. But something in the forest, in the air itself, told him to stay. With a deep breath, Max turned and began to walk toward the edge of the clearing. His steps were deliberate, not rushed. The whispers, now soft and steady, seemed to encourage him, guiding him onward. The forest was alive with sound again, the crickets humming in the distance, the occasional breeze rustling through the leaves. Yet, despite the return of the usual nighttime chorus, the feeling of being watched remained. He stepped beyond the clearing, back into the thick of the woods, the trees now towering above him like silent sentinels. Their trunks were ancient, their bark rough with age, their branches reaching toward the stars in an endless, silent vigil. As Max walked deeper, the shadows grew longer, the air cooler, and the night seemed to close in around him, wrapping him in a blanket of silence. The whispers were stronger now, not just in the wind, but in the very air around him, as if the trees themselves were speaking to him. Max paused, his breath shallow, listening intently. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, soft, melodic, like a lullaby sung by the wind itself. He continued walking, unable to shake the feeling that he was being led somewhere. His lantern cast flickering shadows on the ground, but the light seemed to be swallowed up by the darkness of the forest. It was as though the trees themselves were absorbing the light, guiding him forward into an unknown destination. As he walked, Max felt a shift, a change in the very energy of the forest. The air felt thicker now, more tangible, and the whispers seemed to converge into a singular sound, a soft hum that resonated deep within his chest. It was a hum that spoke of ancient things, things beyond human understanding. Max could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The path before him began to twist and turn, leading him deeper into the heart of the woods. His lantern flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows on the ground. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled, their trunks twisted in strange shapes. The feeling of being watched intensified. But now, Max wasn't sure if it was just the trees themselves that were watching him. The air seemed to hold something else, something far older, far wiser than the forest itself. Max paused again, a wave of dizziness washing over him. His feet felt as though they were sinking into the earth, as though the very ground beneath him was pulling him deeper into the woods. It was an unfamiliar sensation, not of fear, but of something ancient and primordial, a force he couldn't explain. For a moment, he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, he was standing in front of something that made his heart skip a beat. A massive tree, older than any he had seen before, stood before him, its bark dark and weathered, its roots twisting into the ground like the fingers of a giant hand. Its branches stretched high into the sky, disappearing into the canopy above. At the base of the tree, hidden in the roots, was a small door. A door made of intricately woven vines, with strange symbols carved into the wood. Max felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to approach the door. It felt like an invitation to step into something unknown, to uncover the secrets hidden within the heart of the forest. Max stood before the ancient tree, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight of the door. It seemed to shimmer faintly under the moonlight, its surface covered with vines that twisted and curled in mesmerizing patterns. The carvings on the door were intricate, almost otherworldly, depicting symbols and shapes Max couldn't quite comprehend. Some resembled the leaves of the trees around him, while others were strange, abstract designs that seemed to shift slightly when he looked at them for too long. For a moment, he hesitated, his fingers still holding the lantern, the flickering light casting erratic shadows on the ground. A sense of wonder stirred inside him, tempered with a thread of uncertainty. He had followed the whispers of the forest this far, walked deeper into its heart than he had ever dared before, and now, here he stood, facing a door that seemed to promise answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask. The air around him was thick with the scent of earth and moss, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. There was no sound now, no whispering winds or rustling leaves, just the stillness of the night, as though the forest itself was waiting for him to make a decision. The tunnel eventually opened up into a vast underground cavern. The walls were lined with glowing fungi, casting an ethereal, greenish light over the space. The ceiling arched high above him, lost in shadows, while the floor was covered with thick moss, soft and springy beneath his feet. Max could see small pools of water scattered throughout the cavern, their surfaces reflecting the faint glow of the fungi. In the center of the cavern stood a stone pedestal, weathered and worn with age. Upon it rested a small, glowing crystal, its light pulsing softly in the still air. The crystal seemed to call to Max, its glow steady and calm, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. It was beautiful, pure and unblemished, its light shimmering with an inner warmth that seemed to radiate throughout the cavern. Max felt an overwhelming urge to approach the pedestal, as though he were being drawn to the crystal by an invisible force. His steps were slow but purposeful, each footfall echoing softly in the cavern. As he drew closer, the air around him seemed to hum with energy, and he could feel the presence of something ancient, something far older than the forest itself. When he finally reached the pedestal, he stood before the crystal, mesmerized by its gentle glow. It was small enough to fit in his hand, yet its presence was enormous, filling the entire cavern with a sense of profound calm. He reached out slowly, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered just above the surface of the crystal. It was then that he heard it. A soft voice, not in words, but in feelings, in emotions. It was the voice of the forest, ancient and wise, speaking directly to his heart. The message was clear. The crystal was a key to understanding the true nature of the forest, to unlocking the secrets it had guarded for millennia. It was the heart of the woods, the very essence of its magic, and it had been waiting for him. Max's hand hovered over the crystal, and for a moment, he felt a deep hesitation. What would it mean to touch it, to claim it as his own? The crystal was more than just a physical object. It was a symbol, a connection between the human world and the ancient, untamed magic of the forest. His breath quickened, and as if responding to his inner conflict, the crystal pulsed once more, its glow intensifying. Max closed his eyes, letting the energy of the crystal wash over him. He felt the forest in his bones, its history, its power, its wisdom. And in that moment he understood. He understood that he was not just a visitor here. He was part of the forest's story, a part of its legacy. With a final, steadying breath, Max reached out and gently touched the crystal. As soon as Max's fingers made contact with the crystal, a surge of energy rippled through him. It was as if a current of pure, unfiltered life coursed through his veins, and in that instant, he felt connected to everything. The trees, the earth, the sky, and the ancient heartbeat of the forest itself. The crystal's light flared brightly, temporarily blinding him, and for a moment, Max felt as if he were suspended in time, existing outside of the physical world. His breath caught in his throat as the energy seemed to flow into him, filling him with a deep sense of purpose, as if the forest were telling him something important. The voice was no longer just a feeling. It was clearer now, not a spoken language but a presence, an essence that Max could understand at his core. It wasn't just the forest, but the entire world around him that spoke in this language of energy, of life, and he was finally attuned to it. The cavern seemed to dissolve around him, the fungi glowing brighter, the air thick with an indescribable force. Max closed his eyes again, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all, but a sense of calm washed over him as well. He wasn't afraid. No, he felt more alive than he had ever felt in his entire life. There was something comforting about this energy, something ancient yet familiar. It was as though the forest had been waiting for him all this time, preparing him for this very moment. Max opened his eyes, and when he did, the cavern was no longer just a cavern. It had transformed. The stone walls were now covered in lush, vibrant vines, and the glowing fungi that had once merely illuminated the cavern now emitted a warm, golden light. The pools of water were clearer than before, reflecting the new radiance that filled the space. The entire cavern had shifted, becoming a living part of the forest. He stood there, blinking in awe as the world around him slowly came into focus. The pedestal was gone now, replaced by a swirling pool of light at the center of the cavern. The crystal floating above it, suspended in midair. The crystal no longer pulsed. It hummed with a steady, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through his chest. As he stepped forward, drawn to the new center of attention, Max noticed something remarkable. The pool of light was not just light. It was a portal. It shimmered and rippled like water, but it had a depth to it that went beyond physical reality. The air around it seemed to bend and twist, creating an illusion of infinite space, an opening to something far beyond the boundaries of the physical world. Max couldn't help himself. He reached toward the shimmering portal, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and wonder. He had no idea where it would lead, but deep inside, he knew that this was his next step. It was a path that he had to take, a journey that was as much a part of him as the forest itself. Just as his fingers brushed the edge of the portal, the humming sound intensified, growing louder and more resonant. The light from the crystal surrounded him like a cocoon, and the forest's voice, soft but undeniably clear, spoke again. This time, the message was a simple one. You have been chosen, Max. The forest calls to you, and it is time to walk the path that has been prepared for you. The way forward is not always clear, but it will always lead you home. Max stood still for a moment, letting the words sink in. The forest had called him here, had guided him through this strange journey, and now it was entrusting him with something far greater than he could have ever imagined. He was part of something much larger than himself. He wasn't just a visitor to the woods. He was an integral part of its story, its future. With the realization settling deep within him, Max stepped through the portal. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the world around him shifted once again. The cavern disappeared entirely, replaced by an entirely new landscape. The air was warmer here, the light softer, as if it were early morning, just before the sun had fully risen. The trees were different, taller and more majestic, with thick canopies that stretched toward the sky like guardians of an ancient realm. The ground beneath his feet was soft, covered in a thick blanket of moss and fallen leaves. He stood in a vast, open forest, one that seemed to stretch for miles in every direction. But there was something different about this forest. The air felt charged with an ancient energy, and the trees, though beautiful, seemed to be watching him, their branches swaying slightly, as though acknowledging his presence. The forest was alive, not just with plants and animals, but with an ancient consciousness that had been waiting for him. Max felt a pull in his chest, a gentle nudge that urged him forward. He started walking, not sure where he was going, but trusting in the pull of the forest. His feet carried him effortlessly through the undergrowth, his senses heightened, every rustling leaf, every bird call, every soft movement in the brush drawing his attention. As he walked, he realized that this forest, though more vibrant and full of life than any he had seen before, was also deeply familiar. It was as if he had been here before, or at least as if a part of him had. His steps were guided, almost as if by memory. He wasn't alone here, he could feel it. The presence of the forest surrounded him, watching, guiding, encouraging him to keep moving forward. After some time, the trees began to thin out, and Max found himself standing before a massive stone structure. It was ancient, covered in moss and vines, but it was unmistakably a temple of sorts. Its stone walls were carved with the same intricate symbols he had seen on the door back at the tree. The doorway stood open, inviting him inside. Max's heart raced. He had been led here for a reason, of that he was certain. He wasn't just a wanderer lost in the woods. He was a part of something much larger, something that had been unfolding for centuries, perhaps even longer. The temple, the forest, the crystal, the whispers. It was all leading him to this place. Without hesitation, Max stepped into the temple. As Max stepped into the temple, the world outside seemed to fall away, leaving him in a sacred silence that was profound and unshakable. The air within the temple was cool and still, but there was something alive about it, something ancient and wise, as though the very walls were imbued with the knowledge of centuries, waiting for someone to unlock its mysteries. The temple's interior was both awe-inspiring and overwhelming. The walls were covered with intricate carvings, similar to the symbols he had seen on the door back in the forest, but now they seemed even more detailed, more elaborate, as though each line and curve held a story of its own. The carvings depicted scenes of nature, trees, animals, rivers, mountains, interwoven with cosmic symbols that hinted at the interconnectedness of all things, the balance of life and death, the cycles of the earth. Max's footsteps echoed softly as he walked further into the heart of the temple. His lantern flickered in his hand, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the walls, bringing the carvings to life. The deeper he went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The air became thick with a sense of reverence, and it felt as though the very temple was breathing, alive with energy. At the center of the temple stood an altar, made of smooth stone and covered with soft moss. It was simple yet elegant, and it seemed to draw Max toward it as if it were calling him to come closer. He approached the altar slowly, his eyes scanning the carvings around him, but nothing in the temple could have prepared him for what he saw atop the altar. Resting there was a small, intricately carved box. It was made of the same dark wood as the door he had passed through earlier, and it was covered in the same symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the lantern. The box was beautiful, its craftsmanship flawless, and it had an aura of mystery around it, as though it contained something precious, something powerful. Max couldn't resist. His hands trembling slightly, he reached out and lifted the box from the altar. The moment his fingers touched it, a wave of warmth surged through him, like the pulse of the forest itself. The box felt alive, almost as if it were responding to his touch. He held it carefully in his hands, as though it were a fragile artifact, but there was no fear, only the steady beat of his heart in time with the gentle hum that seemed to emanate from the box. He looked around the temple again, as though searching for answers. The carvings on the walls seemed to be watching him, their patterns shifting as though they were alive, too. The more he focused on them, the more he began to understand. The symbols were not just decoration. They were a map, a guide. They told a story of the forest, of the crystal, of the ancient forces that had shaped the world. Max took a deep breath, his gaze returning to the box in his hands. There was no turning back now. He knew that whatever lay inside this box was the next step in his journey, the next piece of the puzzle that the forest had led him to find. He slowly unlatched the box and opened it. Inside, nestled in a bed of soft moss, was a stone. It was smooth and round, glowing with a soft, pale light. The stone was unlike anything Max had ever seen before. It seemed to pulse with energy, each beat synchronized with his own heart. The moment he touched it, a flood of images overwhelmed him, visions of the forest, of the earth, of stars and galaxies, of the ancient cycle of life and death that had played out across the ages. He saw the forest in its earliest form, when it was but a seed in the earth waiting to grow. He saw the crystal in its original place, glowing with the same light it had when he first touched it. He saw the connection between the forest, the crystal, and the stone. The three were part of a greater whole, a network of energy that spanned the world, connecting all things living and non-living alike. Max stumbled backward, his mind reeling from the flood of images. He could feel the weight of the stone in his hands, but it was as though it was no longer just a physical object. It was part of him now, part of the forest, part of the earth. It was a key, he realized, a key to understanding the deeper truths of the world. The forest had not just called him here to witness its beauty, but to understand its essence, to become one with it. The stone's glow grew brighter, filling the entire temple with a soft, golden light. Max could feel it resonating with the pulse of the earth beneath him, the same pulse he had felt when he first touched the crystal. It was all connected, he was connected, and he understood now what the forest had been trying to tell him. He was not an outsider, not a mere visitor. He was part of the forest's story, and his journey was just beginning. Suddenly, the temple around him seemed to come alive. The walls, the carvings, the air itself, all seemed to shimmer with energy, as though the entire space was resonating with the power of the stone. Max felt a deep sense of peace wash over him, but it was more than that. It was a sense of belonging, of being exactly where he was meant to be. The voice of the forest spoke again, but this time it was not just in his mind. It was all around him, in the very air, in the very earth. The message was clear. The forest has waited for you, Max. Now you must take your place in its story. The journey ahead will not always be easy, but you are ready. The stone will guide you, and the forest will protect you. Trust in the connection that binds you to the earth, and remember, you are never alone. Max stood there, feeling the weight of the stone in his hands, its energy vibrating through him, connecting him to something much greater than himself. He had a sense of purpose now, a sense of direction. The path before him was clear, and though it would be filled with challenges, he knew that he was ready. The forest had chosen him, and he was ready to answer its call. With one final, steadying breath, Max turned and walked toward the temple's exit. As he passed through the doorway, the temple's light dimmed, and the whispers of the forest grew louder, guiding him forward. As Max stepped out of the temple, the world outside greeted him with the same serene beauty that had captivated him from the very beginning of his journey. The air was warm, the sky a rich blend of twilight blues and soft purples, hinting at the arrival of evening. The trees, towering and majestic, stood like sentinels, their leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze, as if whispering secrets to one another. Max looked around, trying to take in the enormity of what had just occurred. The stone in his hand pulsed with an almost rhythmic glow, its light a steady pulse that mirrored his own heartbeat. He could still feel the energy from the temple swirling within him, a deep connection to the forest, to the earth, to something far greater than he could comprehend. The stone wasn't just an object, it was a part of him now, and he could sense its power, its purpose. The path before him stretched on, winding through the forest, but it no longer seemed like a random trail. It felt intentional, as though the very ground beneath his feet had been shaped by the hand of the forest itself to guide him forward. Every step he took was purposeful, drawing him deeper into the unknown. Yet he didn't feel lost. There was an undeniable sense of direction, as though the forest had become an extension of his own body, every movement a part of the larger design. As Max walked, the world around him shifted in subtle ways. The trees seemed to open up before him, creating clearings and paths where there had once been none. The undergrowth parted, and the air seemed to grow lighter, as though the very atmosphere was bending to accommodate his presence. It was as if the forest itself was watching him, guiding him and protecting him. The deeper he ventured, the more Max felt the presence of something ancient, something that existed beyond time itself. The whispers he had heard in the temple began to return, but now they were clearer, more distinct. The voice of the forest, now a gentle hum, seemed to be telling him something, urging him to keep moving. Max reached a small clearing where a tranquil stream wound its way through the landscape, its waters shimmering with a silvery light under the fading sunlight. The sight of the water brought a sense of calm to his restless mind. The stream flowed effortlessly, winding its way through the trees, and as Max stood there, he could feel its rhythm, its pulse, aligning with his own. The stone in his hand glowed brighter, its light matching the shimmer of the stream, and Max felt a pull to follow the water's path. He stepped toward the edge of the stream, his boots barely making a sound on the soft earth. The coolness of the water trickled over his fingers as he dipped his hand into the stream, and in that moment, the world seemed to pause. A vision overtook him. The images flooded his mind, images of the forest in its prime, vast and untamed, stretching endlessly across the land. He saw animals roaming freely, birds soaring high above the trees, the sun shining brightly in a sky unblemished by clouds. He saw the trees growing, their roots sinking deep into the earth, feeding on the energy of the land. And at the center of it all was the crystal, its light pulsing with the heartbeat of the forest, connected to the land, the sky, and the stars. Max saw himself in the vision, standing at the edge of the forest, watching as the balance of nature unfolded before him. He was a part of it all, a part of the great, unbroken cycle that had existed since the beginning of time. And yet, he knew that something had changed, something was missing. The harmony of the forest had been disturbed, its energy fractured. The crystal, once glowing with vibrant light, had dimmed, its pulse weakening. The vision shifted, and Max saw the forest in turmoil. The trees, once so vibrant and full of life, began to wither and decay. The streams dried up, the animals vanished, and the air became thick with an unsettling silence. The balance that had once existed was broken, and the forest was beginning to fade. But there was hope. In the distance, Max saw a figure cloaked in light, standing at the heart of the forest. The figure reached out, and in its hands, Max saw a faint, glowing stone. The stone pulsed with the same rhythm as the crystal, as if it were a key to restoring the balance, a key to reviving the forest. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, and Max was left standing by the stream, his heart racing. He could still feel the pulse of the stone in his hand, the connection between him and the forest stronger than ever. He knew that the path ahead was not just about discovering the mysteries of the woods. It was about restoring something that had been lost, something that only he could fix. The whispers of the forest, now a clear and unmistakable voice, echoed in his mind once again. The balance has been disturbed. The forest is in danger, and you, Max, are the key to restoring it. The stone you carry will guide you, but you must seek out the other stones. Find the pieces that will heal the forest and restore its light. Max nodded to himself, a sense of purpose flooding through him. He had come this far, and now he understood what he had to do. The stone in his hand was just one part of the puzzle. The other stones, the pieces that would restore balance to the forest, were out there waiting to be found. Without another word, Max turned and began to walk along the stream, following its winding path deeper into the heart of the forest. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he knew that he was no longer alone. The forest, the stones, the ancient energy, it was all connected, and he was a part of it. And so, with the glow of the stone guiding him, Max stepped further into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him, and determined to restore the balance that had been lost. The path that Max followed was not linear, nor did it make sense in any conventional way. But the further he traveled, the more he realized that there was a purpose to the way the forest had laid itself out. Each turn, each fork in the path, seemed to bring him closer to something. He could feel it in the air, in the earth beneath his feet. As he journeyed, Max began to notice subtle changes in the environment around him. The air grew cooler, the trees taller and more ancient. The forest, which had felt welcoming and warm at first, now seemed to hold an air of mystery and quiet reverence. The ground beneath him was soft, almost spongy, as if the forest had a way of cushioning his steps, making the journey easier as he moved deeper into its embrace. But with each step, the whispers in the trees grew louder. The forest wasn't just guiding him, it was testing him, asking him to pay attention, to listen, to trust in his instincts. And so Max did. He listened. He stopped when he needed to, allowing the sounds of the forest to fill his senses. The rustling leaves, the distant call of birds, the trickling of water, the hum of insects in the underbrush. It wasn't long before he came to a small clearing, one that felt different from all the others. There was something here, something important. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk thick and gnarled, its roots twisting down into the earth like the fingers of a giant. The tree was massive, its branches stretching high into the sky, and its leaves were a deep, vibrant green. It radiated an energy that Max could feel deep in his chest, a familiar energy, like the pulse of the stone in his hand. Max approached the tree cautiously, his footsteps soft on the earth. As he drew nearer, he could see that the ground around the tree was dotted with small, glowing stones, each one a different color, each one pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light. The stones seemed to hum with the same energy as the one in his hand, and Max could sense that they were connected, part of the larger network of energy that the forest had woven. He reached out and picked up one of the stones. It was smooth and warm to the touch, its glow faint but steady. The moment his fingers closed around it, the energy surged within him, and the stone seemed to resonate with the one he already carried. Max's mind was flooded with another vision. The forest, vast and beautiful, stretching as far as the eye could see. But this time he saw something different. The trees, the streams, the animals, they were all connected, intertwined in a web of life that stretched across the entire land. He saw the same figure from before, cloaked in light, standing at the center of this web. The figure reached out and touched the trees, the stones, the earth itself, and everything in the forest responded. The air shimmered with energy, and Max could feel the pulse of the forest, the heartbeat of the earth, thrum through him. The vision was clear now. Max understood. The stones were the keys to restoring balance to the forest. Each one represented a different element, a different piece of the natural world. The energy from the stone in his hand seemed to connect with the one in his chest, and Max could feel the power of the forest flowing through him. He had to find the other stones, the other pieces that would restore the balance and protect the forest from the growing darkness that threatened it. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, and Max stood alone in the clearing, the stone still warm in his hand. He knew what he had to do next. The whispers of the forest were clearer now, the voice speaking directly to him. The stones are scattered throughout the forest, each one hidden in a place where only the worthy may find them. Seek them out, Max, and restore the balance that has been broken. The path will not be easy, but you are not alone. The forest is with you, as you are with it. Max nodded, his resolve firming. He had the first stone. He had the key to the forest's heart, but there were others to find. The path ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. He turned back to the ancient oak tree, his eyes scanning the ground for any more stones. The forest around him felt alive with anticipation, as if it were waiting for him to make the next move. He knew that every step he took would bring him closer to the other stones, and with each one, he would unlock more of the forest's secrets. But as he looked out into the distance, Max also knew that the forest wasn't the only one watching. The darkness that had begun to creep into the forest was still out there, waiting. And as much as the forest had embraced him, it also needed him. He was the protector, the one who could restore what had been lost. And so, with the stone in his hand and the whispers of the forest in his ears, Max set out once more, determined to find the other stones and restore the balance of the world. Max continued his journey deeper into the forest, his mind focused on the task ahead. He had the first stone, and with it, he felt a connection to the very heartbeat of the land. The energy from the stone pulsed gently in his hand, guiding him through the thickening woods, as though the forest itself was leading him toward the next piece of the puzzle. But there was a growing unease in the air, a sense that something was watching him, something just beyond his reach, something that didn't belong in this peaceful world. The further he ventured, the more pronounced the shift in the atmosphere became. The trees, which had once been welcoming and full of life, now seemed more distant, their branches stretching high above him like dark, looming shadows. The wind had picked up, swirling through the leaves in an eerie, restless dance, carrying with it a strange chill. It was as though the very essence of the forest had shifted, and something darker was stirring beneath its surface. Max couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every so often, he'd hear a rustle in the bushes or a snap of a twig, but when he turned, there was nothing there. It was as though the forest itself was hiding its secrets from him, as if it knew he was getting closer to something that shouldn't be disturbed. His instincts, honed from days spent navigating the wilderness, told him to be cautious, to stay alert. There was something in the air, something wrong. The stone in his hand seemed to grow heavier, its pulse quicker, as though it too was aware of the change. Through the dense trees, the dark silhouette of a figure appeared, tall and shrouded in shadow, standing motionless on the edge of a clearing. The figure slowly raised one hand, a single finger pointing toward him, its movement deliberate, as though it were beckoning him closer. A chill ran through Max's spine, but he found his feet moving before he could stop himself. The storm roared louder, the wind picking up as he stepped forward, drawn toward the figure like a moth to a flame. He didn't know why he was going, why he couldn't resist the pull, but he couldn't turn away. The stone in his hand seemed to hum louder now, vibrating with an energy that matched the storm's intensity. Max moved closer, each step taking him deeper into the clearing, until he was standing just feet from the figure. It was tall, its form indistinct and shifting, like smoke swirling in the wind. Its face was obscured, hidden by a dark hood that seemed to blend into the surrounding shadows. But Max could feel its eyes on him, piercing through the darkness, seeing into him. The air around him crackled with a strange energy, a tension that seemed to weigh down the very earth. For a long moment, the figure didn't speak. It merely stood there, waiting, watching, its finger still pointing toward him. The storm above seemed to intensify, the wind howling and the sky darkening even further. Max felt the weight of the moment, the uncertainty, the danger that radiated from the figure. And yet, there was something else, something familiar, something that tugged at the edges of his memory. The figure's voice, when it came, was not a sound. It was a feeling, deep, resonant, like an ancient bell tolling in the distance. "You are not ready," the voice said, its words heavy with meaning. "The storm is not just a force of nature. It is the storm of your destiny, and it will test you. The path you walk will not be easy, Max. You will face trials, choices that will define you, but only if you are strong enough." Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. He didn't fully understand the meaning of the figure's words, but he knew one thing. The forest, the stones, the journey. It was all leading him here, to this moment, to this storm. "You are the key," the figure continued, its voice like thunder in the distance. "But keys can be broken. Beware the darkness that follows you, Max. It is coming for the forest, and for you." The wind howled one final time, and before Max could respond, the figure vanished into the storm, disappearing like smoke on the wind. Max stood alone in the clearing, the storm still raging around him, its fury intensifying with each passing second. The figure had vanished, leaving only the eerie silence in its wake, and the weight of its cryptic words hung in the air like a thick fog. Max's chest tightened as he tried to process everything that had just happened. He felt disoriented, like he had just woken from a strange dream, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The stone in his hand pulsed steadily, its glow faint but constant, a reminder that there was still a task at hand. He had to continue. The storm might have been a warning, but it hadn't stopped him. It had only strengthened his resolve. The forest needed him. The stones needed to be found. The balance had to be restored. Max took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He knew that he couldn't stand here forever, lost in his thoughts and the aftermath of the encounter. He had come too far to turn back now. The path was clear, even if it was shrouded in uncertainty and shadow. And so, with a quiet resolve, he began to move forward again, the storm still howling in his wake. As he walked, the storm's intensity seemed to fluctuate, as if it were testing him. The wind whipped around him, and the sky above crackled with flashes of lightning, illuminating the dark forest in brief, blinding bursts. But Max didn't flinch. He had come to realize something important, that the storm was not just a physical force. It was a manifestation of something much deeper, something tied to the very core of his journey. The figure had told him that the storm was a test, and Max understood now that the storm was not just a battle with the elements. It was a battle within himself, a challenge to his strength, his resolve, his understanding of the path he was walking. The figure's warning echoed in his mind. Keys can be broken. The storm was not just about surviving the external forces. It was about surviving the internal struggles, the doubts, and the fears that would rise up to challenge him. The ground beneath Max's feet was slick with rain, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. The forest had taken on an even more haunting quality in the storm's wake. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to loom over him, their branches swaying violently in the wind, casting long, distorted shadows on the forest floor. The sky above was dark and heavy, the thunder echoing like a distant drumbeat, a constant reminder that the storm was never far behind. Max pressed on, his steps determined, his mind focused on the path ahead. He had to find the next stone. He had to restore the balance. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was changing. It was as though the storm had awakened something in the woods, something ancient and hidden, something that was now watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. And then, just as he thought he couldn't feel more alone, he heard it. A sound, distant at first but unmistakable. The soft, almost melodic sound of a voice whispering. Max froze, his heart skipping a beat. The wind howled around him, but the voice was clear, like a song carried on the wind. It was soft at first, but as he stood there, rooted to the spot, the voice grew louder, more distinct. "You have come far, Max," the voice said, its tone gentle, yet laden with an ancient wisdom. "But the storm is not the only thing you must face." Max's pulse quickened, his eyes scanning the shadows of the forest, trying to locate the source of the voice. He had heard whispers before, but this was different. This voice felt familiar, like a memory he couldn't quite place. "The stones you seek are not just objects," the voice continued. "They are memories, fragments of the past that have been scattered, hidden away to protect the forest. The balance you seek is not just one of the earth and the sky. It is the balance of the past, the present, and the future." Max's brow furrowed, his mind racing. Memories? He had thought the stones were just keys to restoring the forest's balance, not something tied to the past. But now, with the voice echoing in his mind, it made sense. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a living history, a tapestry of memories woven into the very fabric of the land. The storm has awakened the echoes of that history, the voice continued, its tone now filled with urgency. "The darkness you feel is not just a threat to the forest. It is a threat to everything that has ever been. You must find the stones, Max. You must unlock the past, understand it, and restore the memory of what was lost. Max's mind whirled with the weight of the voice's words. Unlock the past? What did that mean? How could he possibly restore memories that had been hidden away for so long? But before he could ponder the meaning of these words any further, the voice spoke again, its tone softer now, almost like a whisper against his ear. The first stone you hold is a piece of the past. You must carry it with you, but you must also learn from it. The other stones are waiting. They are scattered, but they will guide you if you listen closely. Follow the whispers, Max. The answers are all around you, hidden in the shadows. The voice faded, leaving Max standing in the rain-soaked clearing, the storm raging around him. He was once again alone, but the weight of its message pressed heavily on his chest. The storm was more than a test. It was a sign of something much deeper, something rooted in the very history of the forest. Max's hand tightened around the stone in his palm, its faint glow steady in the dark, like a beacon in the storm. The past was calling to him, and he had no choice but to answer. The storm began to subside as Max continued his journey, the voice that had spoken to him lingering in his thoughts. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the lingering chill of the storm, but the tension that had hung heavy over the forest now seemed to dissipate, as if the land itself was taking a deep breath. Max's footsteps were quieter now, the crunch of wet leaves and twigs beneath his boots almost drowned out by the rhythmic patter of rainwater dripping from the trees. As the storm passed, a profound stillness settled over the forest, one that was almost unnerving. The clouds parted just enough for slivers of moonlight to pierce through the canopy, casting a soft, silvery glow on the wet ground. Max could feel the presence of the forest more strongly now, as though the trees and the earth were watching him, aware of his every movement. The voice that had spoken to him before had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and now he was more determined than ever to understand the significance of the stones. What had it meant when it said the stones were memories? What was the past that needed to be unlocked? The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the forest was quieter now, the sounds of the storm replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional call of an owl. Max knew that he couldn't waste time thinking too much about the mysteries surrounding the stones. He had a task to complete, and it was clear that each step would only lead him deeper into something far greater than he could have imagined. He pressed on, moving with purpose now, feeling more attuned to the land beneath his feet. The stone in his hand still pulsed with an unfamiliar energy, and though it had grown dimmer in the wake of the storm, Max could sense its importance. It was both an anchor and a guide, pulling him forward, toward the next step in his journey. Hours passed, and the forest grew denser as he ventured deeper into the heart of the woods. The trees around him grew taller and more twisted, their trunks thick with age and their branches heavy with moss. The path he followed became less distinct, more overgrown with brambles and thick vines, as though nature itself was trying to reclaim the land. Max had the distinct feeling that he was entering a part of the forest that was ancient, a place where time seemed to stand still, where the land had seen and experienced things that no human could fully comprehend. And then, as he rounded a bend, he saw it. In the distance, just beyond a thicket of dense underbrush, was a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone archway, weathered and worn by centuries of exposure to the elements. The archway was carved with intricate symbols, so detailed and precise that it almost seemed as though they were alive, shifting and changing with the movement of the wind. The stones of the arch were covered in moss and vines, but even through the layers of age and time, Max could sense that it was no ordinary structure. It was something far older, far more significant. Max approached cautiously, feeling a sense of reverence as he drew closer to the archway. It was as if he had stumbled upon a forgotten relic of a time long past, a doorway to something beyond his understanding. The stone in his hand pulsed again, its glow faint but steady, as though it recognized the importance of the place. He stood in front of the arch for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The air around him felt charged, alive with an energy that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. Without a word, Max stepped through the archway, crossing the threshold into the clearing beyond. As soon as he did, a strange shift seemed to occur in the air. The world around him seemed to hum with energy, and the ground beneath his feet felt more solid, more rooted. He could sense something here, something powerful, but it was hidden just out of reach, like a memory that lingered at the edge of his consciousness, waiting to be unlocked. In the center of the clearing stood a large, flat stone, ancient and smooth, with symbols etched into its surface. The stone was unlike anything Max had seen before, its surface shimmering faintly in the moonlight. It seemed to call to him, beckoning him forward. The stone in his hand pulsed again, faster now, its glow brighter, as though it had been waiting for him to reach this place. Max stepped closer, his heart racing. He could feel the power of the stone beneath his feet, and as he reached out to touch the smooth surface of the stone in the clearing, a jolt of energy shot through him. The stone in his hand vibrated violently, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, the symbols on the stone in the clearing began to glow, their intricate patterns shifting and changing in time with the pulse of the stone in Max's hand. The air around him hummed with an ancient energy, and Max felt a sudden wave of understanding wash over him. This was it, the connection he had been seeking. The stones, the forest, the past. All of it was coming together. The voice he had heard earlier returned, echoing in his mind. You have come to the heart of the forest, Max. The stone you hold is a key, but it is only one piece of the puzzle. The balance you seek is not just of the earth, but of the past, the present, and the future. To restore what was lost, you must understand the full story. The stones will reveal the truth, but only if you are willing to listen. Max's hand trembled as he pressed the stone against the surface of the ancient stone in the clearing. The moment the two stones made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, and the world around him seemed to dissolve into light. The clearing, the forest, and even the sky above faded away, replaced by a vision of a time long past. He saw a world that was vibrant and alive, a forest much like the one he had just entered, but without the weight of the darkness that now threatened it. The trees were taller, their leaves greener, their roots stronger. Animals roamed freely, and the air was filled with the songs of birds and the rustle of the wind through the leaves. At the center of this world stood a great city, its walls towering high and its streets bustling with life. People of all kinds, humans, creatures of the forest, and beings that seemed to exist between worlds, lived together in harmony, working to protect the land and preserve its balance. But something dark was growing in the distance. Max saw the first stirrings of the storm he had felt earlier, a shadow that spread across the land, twisting and warping the earth as it moved. The harmony that had once existed was shattered, and the city fell into ruin. The balance was broken, and the forest, too, began to wither, its once vibrant life fading into darkness. And then, as quickly as it had come, the vision faded, leaving Max standing alone in the clearing once more. The stones had fallen silent, and the world had returned to its previous state, but Max's heart was heavy with the weight of what he had seen. The past had been lost, and with it, the key to restoring the balance. Max knew what he had to do. The journey was far from over. The stones had revealed their truth, but there were still more to find. More pieces of the puzzle to uncover. Max stood in the clearing, his heart still racing from the vision he had just witnessed. The images of the past, the thriving forest, the great city, the people who had once lived in harmony with nature, were burned into his mind. But it wasn't just the destruction of that world that weighed on him. It was the knowledge that the balance had been shattered. The storm he had felt, the darkness that had tainted the land, was not just an external force. It was a part of the story, a consequence of something deeper, something more ancient. Max gazed at the two stones in his hands, the one he had carried with him and the one he had just activated. They pulsed softly, their glow faint but constant, as though they, too, were aware of the journey that lay ahead. The vision had revealed the connection between the stones, the forest, and the past, but Max knew that the truth was far from complete. The answers he sought were still scattered, hidden in the shadows of the forest, waiting to be uncovered. He took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. The forest around him had settled back into its quiet, peaceful state. The storm that had raged only moments ago now a distant memory. The soft rustling of leaves in the wind was the only sound that filled the air, and the moon above cast a serene, silvery light on the world below. It was as though the land itself was in a state of anticipation, waiting for him to make the next move. Max knew that the journey was far from over. There were still more stones to find, more memories to unlock, and more secrets to discover. But the weight of what he had learned from the vision settled heavily on his shoulders. The past was not just a forgotten history. It was a living, breathing force, and it was up to him to restore what had been lost. He had to find the other stones, but more importantly, he had to understand the balance that had once existed. With renewed determination, Max set his sights on the path ahead. The voice that had spoken to him earlier had said that the stones would guide him if he listened closely. He had felt their pull, their subtle guidance, and he trusted that they would continue to lead him in the right direction. But it was also clear that the forest was not going to make this journey easy for him. The darkness that had corrupted the land was still out there, lurking, waiting for its moment to strike. As Max stepped away from the ancient clearing, he felt the weight of the stones in his hand, a constant reminder of the responsibility he now carried. The forest was alive with energy, but it was also alive with danger. The shadows of the past were not just distant memories. They were still present, and Max had no doubt that the forces of darkness would stop at nothing to prevent him from restoring the balance. He pressed on, moving cautiously through the dense underbrush, his senses heightened. The forest seemed to shift around him, the trees closing in as if they were watching, waiting. Max's mind raced with the vision he had seen, the storm, the destruction, the broken city. He knew that in order to restore the forest, he had to understand the forces at play, both past and present. But there was one thing that kept nagging at him: the figure he had seen in the storm. Who was it, and why had it seemed to know so much about him? The figure had warned him, told him that he was not ready, that the storm was a test. But Max couldn't shake the feeling that the figure knew more than it had let on. It had been too calm, too composed, as if it had seen this moment play out before. Max quickened his pace, his thoughts swirling with questions and doubts. He had to keep moving, keep searching, but he knew that the answers wouldn't come easily. The forest had many secrets, and it seemed to be guarding them fiercely. Hours passed, and the deeper Max ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew taller, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches twisting into strange shapes that seemed to claw at the sky. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the ground beneath his feet was soft, almost spongy. The path he followed had all but disappeared, and Max was forced to navigate through dense thickets of brambles and tangled vines. It was during this slow, methodical progression that he felt it again, the presence. It was faint at first, just a whisper in the back of his mind, but it grew stronger with each step. The stone in his hand pulsed with an almost rhythmic beat, as if in tune with the unseen force that was drawing him forward. Max stopped, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The forest was still, and yet there was something watching him, something just beyond the trees. He looked around, his instincts on high alert. The air had grown colder, and the wind had picked up, swirling the leaves around him in erratic patterns. The shadows seemed to stretch further, and the once familiar sounds of the forest were now drowned out by an unsettling silence. And then he saw it. Through the dense foliage, a figure emerged from the darkness. A shadow, tall and imposing, with an aura of malice that made the hairs on the back of Max's neck stand on end. The figure was cloaked in black, its features hidden in the shadows, but Max could feel its gaze on him, cold and calculating. The stone in his hand pulsed wildly, its glow flickering erratically, but Max didn't move. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary figure. It was the presence he had felt earlier, the one that had warned him in the storm. But now it was no longer just a warning. It was a threat. The figure spoke, its voice low and menacing, like a growl in the darkness. "You are too late, Max," it said, its words dripping with contempt. "The storm has already begun. The forest is lost, and so are you." Max tightened his grip on the stone, the glow intensifying, but he stood his ground. He knew that this was no mere coincidence. The darkness had been following him, and now it had come to confront him. But Max refused to back down. He had come too far, seen too much, and learned too much to let fear control him now. "The forest is not lost," Max said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Max's spine. "You think you can stop it? You think you can restore what has been broken?" The figure hissed. "The storm cannot be undone. The darkness is inevitable. It is the end of the forest, and the end of you." Max's heart raced, but he didn't waver. He had the stone. He had the knowledge of the past, and he wasn't going to let this shadow stand in his way. The forest had fought for centuries to protect itself, and he would fight just as hard to protect it. With a deep breath, Max stepped forward, ready for whatever the darkness had in store. The figure stood before Max, its presence overwhelming, the very air around it thick with an unnatural cold. Max could feel the weight of its gaze, even though he could not see its eyes. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to flee from the darkness that emanated from the shadow, but he refused to let fear control him. He had come this far. He had seen the truth in the vision, and he knew that he had a purpose, to restore the balance no matter the cost. The stone in his hand pulsed again, its light flickering, responding to the dark figure in front of him. The figure seemed to take notice of this, its silhouette shifting ever so slightly as if it were intrigued by the stone's reaction. For a long moment, there was only silence, the two of them locked in a tense standoff. Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground, his breath steady. "So," the figure said, its voice as cold as the wind that swept through the trees, "you believe in the forest's salvation. You think these stones will restore what was lost. How naive." Max's grip on the stone tightened, the pulse within it steady, though now it seemed to vibrate with something more intense. An energy, a call to action. He had learned that the stones were more than just keys. They were part of something greater. They were fragments of the forest's memory, pieces of the past that, when united, could restore the balance. "It's not about what I believe," Max replied, his voice strong despite the dread gnawing at him. "It's about what's needed. The balance can be restored. The forest deserves to be whole again." The figure laughed, a sound that seemed to resonate deep in the woods, sending ripples of discomfort through the air. "You are too late, Max," it said, its words dripping with contempt. "The storm has already begun. The forest is lost, and so are you." Max tightened his grip on the stone, the glow intensifying, but he stood his ground. He knew that this was no mere coincidence. The darkness had been following him, and now it had come to confront him. But Max refused to back down. He had come too far, seen too much, and learned too much to let fear control him now. "The forest is not lost," Max said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Max's spine. "You think you can stop it? You think you can restore what has been broken?" The figure hissed. "The storm cannot be undone. The darkness is inevitable. It is the end of the forest, and the end of you." Max's heart raced, but he didn't waver. He had the stone. He had the knowledge of the past, and he wasn't going to let this shadow stand in his way. The forest had fought for centuries to protect itself, and he would fight just as hard to protect it. With a deep breath, Max stepped forward, ready for whatever the darkness had in store. The figure stood before Max, its presence overwhelming, the very air around it thick with an unnatural cold. Max could feel the weight of its gaze, even though he could not see its eyes. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to flee from the darkness that emanated from the shadow, but he refused to let fear control him. He had come this far. He had seen the truth in the vision, and he knew that he had a purpose, to restore the balance no matter the cost. The stone in his hand pulsed again, its light flickering, responding to the dark figure in front of him. The figure seemed to take notice of this, its silhouette shifting ever so slightly as if it were intrigued by the stone's reaction. For a long moment, there was only silence, the two of them locked in a tense standoff. Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground, his breath steady. "So," the figure said, its voice as cold as the wind that swept through the trees. "You believe in the forest's salvation. You think these stones will restore what was lost. How naive." Max's grip on the stone tightened, the pulse within it steady, though now it seemed to vibrate with something more intense. An energy, a call to action. He had learned that the stones were more than just keys. They were part of something greater. They were fragments of the forest's memory, pieces of the past that, when united, could restore the balance. "It's not about what I believe," Max replied, his voice strong despite the dread gnawing at him. "It's about what's needed. The balance can be restored. The forest deserves to be whole again." The figure laughed, a sound that seemed to resonate deep in the woods, sending ripples of discomfort through the air. Max felt a surge of energy through the stone, and suddenly, a vision appeared before him. Not one from the past, but one from the present. He saw the forest, its trees, its creatures, its delicate balance, suffocating beneath the weight of the darkness. The shadows were closing in, choking the life from the land. And in the center of it all stood the stone archway, its symbols faint, the once vibrant glow now dimming. The forest was dying. But in that same vision, Max saw something else. A flicker of light, a spark of hope. The stones, scattered across the forest, were beginning to glow. They were awakening. The balance wasn't completely gone. It was only dormant, waiting for someone to awaken it. Max's hand tightened around the stone. He wasn't alone. The forest was with him. He wasn't just a boy with a stone. He was the one who could restore the forest's heart, who could awaken its power and bring back the harmony that had been lost. The storm, the darkness, it was all part of the test. The storm would pass, and the forest would be reborn. The figure seemed to sense the shift. Its form wavered for a moment, and a cold laugh echoed through the clearing. "Foolish boy, you believe in the lies of the forest. You believe in hope, but hope is a fleeting thing. It does not last." Max stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the figure, the weight of the stone in his hand grounding him. "Hope is all we have," he said firmly, his voice unwavering, "and I'll fight for it, no matter the cost." With those words, Max raised the stone high above his head. The light that emanated from it flared once more, brilliant and blinding, cutting through the shadows and pushing back the darkness. The air around him seemed to crackle with energy, and the ground beneath him trembled. The force of the stone's light was overwhelming, but Max held it steady, feeling the power of the forest course through him. And as the light reached its peak, the figure before him howled in fury, its form shattering into darkness, dissolving into the very shadows it had once commanded. The storm, too, seemed to retreat, the wind dying down, the oppressive air lifting. Max stood in the clearing, breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. The darkness had been pushed back, for now. But he knew this was only the beginning. The forest was still in danger, and there were more stones to find. The journey was far from over. But for the first time since he had entered the forest, Max felt a surge of hope, a belief that the forest could be saved. The path ahead was unclear, but he knew one thing for certain. He would continue. No matter what darkness lay ahead, he would fight to restore the balance and save the forest. As he approached the stream, he saw something in the distance. Another stone, half buried in the earth. This one was different from the first, its surface smooth and polished, its shape more rounded. It was as though it had been waiting for him, for this moment. Max knelt down, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for it. The moment his fingers made contact with the stone, A surge of energy shot through him, and a vision flashed before his eyes. The vision was different from the ones he had seen before. This time, he wasn't just a passive observer. He was part of the vision, living through it, experiencing the past firsthand. He saw the ancient forest in its prime, a lush, vibrant place where the trees were tall and strong, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. He saw the people who had once lived there, humans and creatures alike, living in harmony with the land. The forest was alive, not just with plants and animals, but with magic, with energy that flowed through every living thing. He saw the moment the storm began. It started as a small disturbance, a whisper of wind, but it quickly grew stronger, more violent. The once peaceful forest was torn apart by the storm. The magic that had once flowed so freely now twisted and corrupted. The people fought back, but they were overwhelmed. The balance was broken, and with it, the forest began to die. Max saw himself in the vision. He was there, in the past, standing alongside the people of the forest. He was holding the stone he now possessed, using its power to try and fight the storm, to restore the balance. But it wasn't enough. The storm was too powerful, and the forest fell into darkness. The vision shifted, and Max saw the aftermath of the destruction. The once vibrant forest was now a shadow of itself, its trees twisted and dying, its creatures nowhere to be found. The people had vanished, their lives erased from history. The stones were scattered, hidden away, their power lost to time. The vision faded, and Max was left breathless, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had just witnessed. The storm wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a force of corruption, a power that had twisted the very essence of the forest. And Max realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that the storm had been sentient, alive, with a purpose. It had been waiting for the right moment to strike. But the vision also showed him something else, a glimmer of hope. The people of the forest had fought, and so had he. The stones, when united, held the power to restore the balance, to heal the land. The storm could be defeated. The darkness could be pushed back. Max rose to his feet, the second stone now pulsing in his hand, its energy melding with the first stone's power. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to see this through to the end. The forest was calling to him, guiding him toward the next stone, the next step in the journey. And no matter how difficult or dangerous it might be, Max knew that he couldn't turn back now. He had seen the truth. He had seen the way forward. He took a deep breath and turned toward the path ahead. The forest was alive, and he was a part of it. Together, they would restore the balance, and the storm would not have the last word. The air around Max seemed to hum with energy as he moved forward along the winding path beside the stream. The second stone in his hand pulsed gently, its glow a soft and steady rhythm, almost as though it was echoing the heartbeat of the forest itself. His mind still swirled with the vision he had just experienced. The storm, the destruction, the people who had fought to save the forest. But now, in the silence that surrounded him, he could feel the forest's deep longing, the yearning for restoration, and he knew that he was the one who could answer it. The path ahead was narrow and winding, the trees beginning to grow thicker and taller as he ventured deeper into the forest. Their trunks twisted in strange, graceful patterns, as though they had lived for centuries, bearing the scars of time. Max could feel the weight of their age, of their wisdom. He wondered how many of these trees had witnessed the rise and fall of the forest, how many of them had once stood proudly, their branches stretching high into the sky before the storm came. But he couldn't afford to linger on thoughts of the past. The next stone was waiting for him, and every step he took brought him closer to it. As he walked, the quiet of the forest seemed to deepen. The sounds of the stream grew distant, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves overhead. The air felt charged, thick with an invisible presence, as though the very forest was watching him. Max paused for a moment, instinctively aware of the change in the atmosphere. The path ahead was now shrouded in shadow, and the trees around him loomed large, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the light of the moon. And then he heard it, a sound that seemed to come from all around him, a low, rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Max instinctively took a step back, his eyes scanning the darkness. But there was nothing to see, just the shifting shapes of the trees and the thickening shadows. The growl came again, louder this time, and this time Max saw it. An outline just beyond the shadows. It was massive, dark, its eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The figure was a creature, unlike any animal Max had seen before. It was not quite animal, not quite human, but something in between. Its body covered in thick, dark fur, its arms long and muscular, its face partially obscured by a tangle of wild hair. Max froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature was watching him, its glowing eyes narrowing as it stepped forward, its massive paws making no sound as it moved through the underbrush. Who dares to walk these sacred paths? The voice that came from the creature was deep and resonant, like the rumbling of thunder. Max swallowed hard but stood his ground. "I am Max," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I'm here to restore the balance. I'm looking for the stones." The creature paused, its eyes glinting in the darkness as it studied Max. For a long moment, it didn't move, and Max couldn't tell if it was considering his words or simply sizing him up. The tension in the air was thick, the silence between them pressing in on him. Finally, the creature spoke again, its voice a low growl. "You are a fool if you think the forest can be saved. It has already chosen its fate. The storm is inevitable, and you will not stop it." Max tightened his grip on the stones, the glow from both of them intensifying as he felt a surge of energy rising within him. "The storm doesn't have to be inevitable. I'm here to stop it, to restore the balance. I can do it with the stones. I can fix what was broken." The creature's eyes flashed with something like amusement, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. It stepped closer, its massive form towering over Max, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath its weight. "You think the stones will help you? These ancient relics are nothing but fragments of a broken past. The storm is not just a force of nature, it is the will of the forest itself. It is the consequence of balance lost. You cannot fight what has already been set in motion." Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He knew what the creature was. Some ancient guardian, perhaps, one who had once protected the forest before it fell into decay. It had seen the darkness, and now it was part of it, believing the forest could not be saved. But Max knew better. He had seen the vision, felt the pull of the stones. The forest was not beyond saving. "I'm not trying to fight the forest," Max said firmly. "I'm here to heal it. I believe the forest still has a chance. The stones can help me restore the balance. They can undo what's been done." The creature studied him for a long moment, and Max could feel its gaze weighing on him, as if it were trying to pierce through his very soul. Finally, it spoke, its voice softer now, almost as though it were contemplating his words. "You speak of restoration, but you do not understand the cost. The stones were once a gift, given to the people to protect the forest. But that protection came at a price. The storm is a reflection of the forest's own heart, its anger, its sorrow. To restore the balance is to face the truth of the forest's pain. Are you prepared to bear that burden?" Max felt a shiver run down his spine. He had known there would be a cost, but the words of the creature hit him harder than he had anticipated. He had seen the destruction, but he had never truly understood the depth of the forest's grief. The storm wasn't just a force of nature. It was the embodiment of the forest's suffering, its rage at being forsaken. He looked the creature in the eye, his resolve hardening. "I'm prepared. Whatever it takes, I will restore the balance. I will bear the burden." The creature's gaze softened, just for a moment, before it nodded slowly. "Very well, Max. If you are truly committed to this path, then you must pass my test. Only those worthy of the forest's trust can carry the stones. If you fail, the storm will consume you, and the forest will fall forever." Max nodded, steeling himself for whatever the guardian had in store for him. The creature stepped back, its form shifting as it moved deeper into the shadows. "Proceed then, but remember what you seek comes with a price. The storm cannot be fought without confronting the heart of the forest's sorrow. If you are to succeed, you must face the truth of the forest's past. And with that, the creature vanished into the darkness, leaving Max alone on the path. Max took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead. He didn't know what the Guardian's test would be, but he was ready. The stones pulsed in his hands, their energy still steady and strong. The path forward was unclear, but he knew he couldn't stop now. The forest's sorrow, its anger. He would face it all, and he would restore the balance. Max stood in the now empty clearing, the weight of the Guardian's words hanging in the air around him. The creature's warning echoed in his mind. The storm cannot be fought without confronting the heart of the forest's sorrow. Max wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew that it was crucial to whatever came next. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, the trees standing tall and silent, as if they too were waiting for him to make the next move. The wind had died down, leaving a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The faint glow from the stones in his hands was the only light in the thick, impenetrable shadows. Max could sense the presence of something, some unseen force that was watching, waiting for him to take the first step. But amidst the sorrow, Max felt something else, a flicker of hope. The forest's heart had been broken, but it had not been destroyed. The memories of those who had once lived here still lingered, still yearned for healing. And in that moment, Max realized that the forest's sorrow was not just something to be mourned. It was something to be transformed. If he could carry the sorrow, understand it, and honor it, then he could begin to heal it. Max opened his eyes, his chest tight with emotion but his resolve stronger than ever. The woman, the spirit of the forest's heart, looked at him with a quiet understanding. You have felt the forest's sorrow, Max. Now, you must decide if you are truly ready to bear the weight of its grief. Only then will you be able to heal the forest and restore the balance. Max took a deep breath, the stones in his hands now glowing with a steady, bright light. He could feel the power of the forest, its memories, and its sorrow all around him. He was ready. He had to be. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm with conviction. And with that, the trial had begun. The woman, the spirit of the forest's heart, nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the ancient sorrow of the land. For a long moment, she did not speak, as though she were weighing Max's words, searching for the depth of his resolve. The silence stretched on, heavy with the gravity of what lay ahead. Max felt it. He was on the edge of something monumental, something that would change not only the course of his journey but the very fabric of the forest itself. Finally, the spirit's voice broke the silence, soft and ethereal, yet filled with an ancient power. You have accepted the sorrow, Max. You have chosen the path of understanding. Now you must learn to carry this grief, not as a burden, but as a catalyst for change. The forest's heart has been broken, but it still beats, faintly, in the depths of its soul. Your task is not to erase the pain, but to transform it into something new. The storm is the reflection of this pain, but it is not the end. The storm can pass, but only if you know how to channel its power. Max nodded, his hands tightening around the stones. The glow from them was brighter now, the energy pulsing more strongly, as though responding to the spirit's words. It was as if the stones themselves were aware of the transformation that was taking place within him. He could feel their power, but it was no longer just about the stones. It was about understanding, the deep, raw understanding of the forest's grief, and the wisdom to use it for restoration. The spirit of the forest raised her hands, and the clearing around them seemed to shimmer. The trees seemed to sway, though there was no wind. The air grew heavier, thick with the weight of the past, the sorrow, the longing for healing. Follow me, the spirit said, her voice now a soft whisper that seemed to echo from every direction. The path to healing begins with understanding the depth of what has been lost. Only then can you restore what has been broken. Max hesitated for a moment, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on him, but he followed the spirit. She led him deeper into the forest, the path growing more narrow, the shadows thickening as the trees closed in around them. The air grew cooler, and the only sounds were the distant murmur of the wind and the soft rustle of the leaves above. The stone in his hand glowed steadily, its light casting faint shadows that danced on the trunks of the trees. After what felt like an eternity, they came to a clearing unlike any Max had seen before. The trees here were ancient, their bark gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching high into the sky like skeletal hands. In the center of the clearing was a large, hollowed-out stump, the remains of a once majestic tree that had long since fallen. Its core had been carved out, leaving a large, empty space in the middle. The spirit stopped in front of the stump and turned to face Max, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful wisdom. "This is where it all began," she said softly. "The heart of the forest was once here in this very spot. The tree that stood before you was the guardian of balance, the keeper of the forest's soul. It was the first of its kind, the one who saw the coming storm and tried to stop it. But in doing so, it sacrificed its own life, and with it, the heart of the forest. The balance was broken, and the forest began to die." Max stepped closer to the stump, his heart heavy with the realization of what the spirit was saying. The storm had not been a random event. It had been the result of a deep, ancient loss. The forest's heart had been torn out, and with it, the essence of what kept it alive. The balance was not just disrupted, it was shattered. The storm was the reflection of that shattering. The spirit continued, her voice tinged with sadness. "The tree that once stood here was not just a physical entity. It was a conduit for the forest's energy, its life force. When it fell, the heart of the forest was lost, and the storm was born. The forest cried out in pain, and the storm was its answer. It was the only way the forest could express its grief, its anger, its fear. And yet it was not enough. The storm, though powerful, only deepened the wound." Max closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the spirit's words. He could feel the forest's sorrow again, the deep ache of loss that had never truly been addressed. The storm was not just a natural disaster. It was a cry for help, a desperate plea for restoration. But the pain had gone unanswered for so long that it had become a storm that ravaged everything in its path. The spirit's voice broke through his thoughts. "You are the one who must answer that cry, Max. You are the one who must carry the sorrow of the forest, transform it, and restore the balance. But to do that, you must understand the true nature of the forest's heart. You must connect with it, feel it, become one with it." Max took a deep breath, his chest tight with emotion. He had been prepared to face the storm, to fight it. But now he realized that the storm was not his enemy. It was a part of the forest's own soul, a manifestation of its deepest grief. To restore the balance, he had to connect with that grief, understand it fully, and then transform it into something that would heal the land. The spirit extended her hand toward him, and as she did, a wave of energy surged through the clearing. Max felt it instantly, the power of the forest's heart, the ancient energy that had once flowed through the tree and the land. It was wild and untamed, full of raw emotion and primal force. "Touch the stump, Max," the spirit instructed. "Feel the energy of the forest's heart. Only then will you understand what must be done." Max hesitated for only a moment before he stepped forward and placed his hand on the hollowed stump. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he was overwhelmed by a flood of images, emotions, and sensations. He saw the forest in its prime, lush, vibrant, alive with the energy of the earth. He saw the people who had lived in harmony with it, their laughter, their joy. And then he saw the storm, the darkness that had consumed everything. The trees fell, the rivers dried up, and the animals fled. The land was left barren, empty, mourning the loss of what had once been. The energy was intense, almost unbearable, but Max clung to it, feeling the forest's sorrow, its rage, its fear, and its longing. It was all there, pulsing through him, and he understood. He understood the depth of the forest's grief, the way it had been abandoned, forsaken. But he also understood that this grief did not have to define the forest's future. It could be transformed, channeled into something that would heal, something that would restore the balance. The vision began to fade, and Max stepped back from the stump, his mind reeling with everything he had just experienced. The spirit of the forest was watching him, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness. "You have seen the truth, Max. Now you must decide. Will you carry the sorrow of the forest in your heart, or will you turn away from it?" Max closed his eyes, his heart heavy but full of determination. He had seen the pain, felt the grief, but he knew now what he had to do. The sorrow could not be ignored, and it could not be erased, but it could be transformed. "I will carry it," Max said, his voice firm. "I will carry the sorrow, and I will restore the balance. I will heal the forest." The spirit nodded, her expression one of approval. "Then the path is clear. You must return to the heart of the storm, where the final trial awaits. Only then will you be able to restore the balance and heal the forest." Max nodded, his heart resolute. He had faced the forest's sorrow and understood its pain. Now it was time to act. The final trial awaited him, and he was ready. Max stood at the edge of the clearing, his body heavy with the weight of what he had just learned. The spirit of the forest's heart had shown him the path, the truth of the land's sorrow, and the burden he would have to carry to restore balance. But now, the next step was clear. The storm, the tempest that had ravaged the forest for so long, awaited him. To heal the land, he would have to confront the storm, face its raw power, and transform its grief into hope. The spirit's words echoed in his mind as he turned toward the dense trees ahead. "The heart of the storm lies at the center of the forest, where the wind howls the loudest and the darkness is the deepest. You will find it there, but you must be prepared. The storm is not just a force of nature. It is the embodiment of the forest's pain, its rage, and its fear. To heal it, you must understand it." Max took a deep breath, his hands still clutching the stones. Their light was steady, their energy now a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his being. He could feel their pulse, responding to his emotions, his determination. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. The forest had already suffered. The trees had fallen, the rivers had dried, and the animals had fled. The storm had been a constant, an ever-present reminder of the forest's broken heart. But now Max had seen the truth of the storm. It was not an enemy to be defeated. It was a manifestation of the forest's sorrow, and it could be healed, just like the rest of the land. Max began to walk forward, the path narrowing as he ventured deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees grew taller, their trunks dark and twisted, their branches creaking in the heavy silence. The air was thick with tension, the atmosphere electric with the impending storm. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and Max could feel a change in the air. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with energy, a raw, untamed force that seemed to whisper secrets of the forest's past. The storm was close. As he continued forward, the wind grew stronger, the trees bending and swaying, their branches reaching out as though to warn him. Max felt a strange pull, a sense of inevitability, as if the forest itself was guiding him toward the heart of the storm. And yet, there was also a deep sadness in the air, a quiet pleading that seemed to come from the earth itself. Finally, Max reached a clearing, and there, in the center of it all, was the storm. It was unlike anything he had imagined. The sky was dark, swirling with angry clouds, and the wind howled like a living creature, twisting and thrashing against the trees. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the chaotic scene for a brief moment before plunging everything back into darkness. The air was thick with energy, and Max could feel the storm's power pulsing through the ground beneath his feet. But there was something more, something hidden beneath the storm's ferocity. Max could feel it, deep in his chest. It was the sorrow of the forest, the grief of a land that had been torn apart. The storm was not just a natural disaster. It was a reflection of the forest's pain, a living manifestation of its broken heart. The stones in Max's hands began to glow brighter, responding to the storm's energy. He could feel the connection, the pull of the forest's heart, and he knew what he had to do. To heal the storm, he had to understand it, carry its sorrow as his own, and transform it into something that would bring hope. Max stepped forward, his body tense but his heart steady. The wind howled around him, the storm's fury pressing in on all sides. But Max didn't flinch. He stood tall, his gaze fixed on the swirling chaos before him. The voice of the spirit echoed in his mind once more. You must connect with the storm, Max, feel its power, its grief, and its anger. Only then can you transform it. Max closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, his heart, and his soul. He could feel the storm's energy, raw and untamed. It was a force of nature, wild and unyielding, but beneath the fury, beneath the lightning and the wind, there was a deeper, quieter pain. The storm was not just a destructive force. It was a cry for help, a plea for healing. He could feel the sorrow of the forest, the years of abandonment, the loneliness that had grown in the absence of care and love. The storm was the forest's grief, its rage, its desperation. But it was also a part of the land, a reflection of the forest's soul. Max understood now. To heal the forest, to restore the balance, he had to heal the storm, transform its grief into something that could bring renewal. Max raised his hands, the stones glowing brightly in the darkness. He could feel their power surging through him, responding to his emotions, his will. The storm howled louder, as if to challenge him, but Max didn't waver. He could feel the forest's sorrow in every gust of wind, in every flash of lightning. He could feel the storm's pain, and he knew that if he could understand it fully, he could begin to heal it. He closed his eyes again, focusing on the storm, reaching out to its energy. He wasn't trying to fight it, he was trying to connect with it. He felt the anger, the fear, the sorrow, and the grief all at once, crashing through him like a tidal wave. But he didn't pull away. He let the emotions wash over him, absorbing them, understanding them. He could feel the storm's pain as his own. And then, something shifted. The storm's energy began to change. The wind, which had been howling in fury, began to slow. The lightning, which had been flashing in chaotic bursts, began to steady. The air, once thick with tension, grew lighter, less oppressive. The storm was still there, but its ferocity had lessened, its power no longer as violent. Max opened his eyes, his hands still raised, and he could see it. The storm was transforming. The grief, the sorrow, the anger. It was all still there, but it was being channeled into something new. The storm was no longer just a destructive force. It was becoming a force of renewal, a catalyst for healing. He stepped forward, his heart full of the forest's sorrow, but also full of its potential for rebirth. The storm was not an enemy to be defeated. It was a part of the forest's soul, a force that needed to be understood and transformed. Max had done that. He had connected with the storm, felt its pain, and now he was transforming it. The storm began to calm, the winds dying down, the lightning softening, the sky clearing. The darkness that had once swallowed the land began to lift, and a soft, golden light began to shine through the clouds. Max stood tall, his hands still raised, his heart full of the forest's energy. The storm was healing. The storm's fury had dissipated, leaving behind a stillness that was almost unnerving in its tranquility. Max stood at the center of the once turbulent clearing, his hands still lifted toward the sky. The air had shifted, lighter now, and a gentle breeze brushed against his skin, as though the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The clouds that had swirled with rage were now breaking apart, allowing the soft light of the sun to pierce through, casting a warm glow across the landscape. Max felt it before he saw it, the subtle change in the earth beneath his feet. The energy, once wild and chaotic, had shifted into something calmer, something more balanced. The forest's heart was no longer in turmoil. It was beginning to heal, slowly but surely. The storm was still there, but it was no longer a destructive force. It had become a part of the restoration process, a necessary step in the forest's healing. As the last of the storm clouds rolled away, Max lowered his hands, his breath steady, his heart racing with the enormity of what he had just accomplished. He had faced the storm, understood its sorrow, and transformed it. He had healed it, and in doing so, he had taken the first step toward restoring the balance of the forest. The spirit of the forest appeared beside him, her presence now soft, almost comforting. Her eyes, once filled with sorrow, were now bright with gratitude, her ethereal form glowing with a gentle, welcoming light. "You have done it, Max," she said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. "The storm has been calmed, the grief of the forest has been acknowledged, and in turn it has been transformed. You have connected with the heart of the forest and have healed the storm. The balance is beginning to return." Max nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. The storm had been an embodiment of the forest's pain, but now it was something different. It had been healed, and with it, the land was beginning to heal as well. The trees around him, which had once stood dark and twisted, were beginning to straighten, their bark brightening, their leaves stirring with new life. The air smelled fresher, as though the forest had taken a deep breath and was now exhaling with relief. The spirit smiled at him, her form shimmering with approval. "But this is only the beginning," she said. "The storm was the reflection of the forest's sorrow, but the true restoration will take time. The balance has been reawakened, but the forest's healing will require patience and care. You have brought the first light of renewal, but you must now continue to nurture it." Max looked around, his heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. The forest was not fully restored yet, but it was on the path to recovery. The storm had been the greatest obstacle, the manifestation of the land's grief, and by confronting it, he had opened the door to healing. But as the spirit had said, this was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done. "What must I do next?" Max asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. The journey had been long and difficult, but he knew there was still more to accomplish. The storm had been healed, but now the forest itself needed care, needed tending. The spirit regarded him with a deep, knowing gaze. "Now that the storm has passed, the forest will begin to reclaim what was lost," she explained. "The trees will begin to grow again, the rivers will flow once more, and the creatures of the land will return. But they will need guidance. They will need someone to watch over them, to ensure that the balance remains. The heart of the forest is still fragile, and it will take time for it to fully heal. You must stay, Max, and help nurture this land back to its former vitality." Max took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over him. The responsibility was great, but he knew that this was his purpose now. He had come to the forest seeking answers, seeking a way to restore balance, and now he understood what he must do. He had the stones, the power, and the connection to the forest's heart. But more than that, he had the wisdom to know that true restoration came from patience and care, from nurturing the land, from understanding that healing was a process, not an event. He looked out across the clearing, watching as the first signs of new growth began to sprout from the earth. Tiny shoots of green broke through the soil, their delicate leaves unfurling toward the sun. The trees, once bent and broken, were standing straighter, their branches reaching toward the sky. The forest was waking up, and Max felt a surge of hope in his chest. It was working. The forest was healing. "I will stay," he said, his voice firm. "I will watch over the forest, and I will help it heal. I will ensure that the balance remains." The spirit smiled again, her eyes filled with pride. "You have made the right choice, Max. The forest has found its protector. You will guide it back to vitality, and in doing so you will also grow. The path ahead will not always be easy, but with patience, care, and understanding, the forest will flourish once more." Max nodded, feeling the weight of his decision but also the deep sense of purpose that came with it. He had faced the storm and transformed it. He had carried the sorrow of the land and turned it into something beautiful. Now it was time to nurture the land back to life. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. Max took one last look at the clearing, at the first signs of life returning to the land, and then he turned toward the heart of the forest. There was much work to be done, but he was ready. He would stay. He would watch over the forest, and he would ensure that it healed. The storm was over, but the journey had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of activity, but also of quiet moments that Max would hold dear for the rest of his life. The forest had begun its recovery, but the work ahead was not simple. As the protector of this land, Max found himself deeply connected to every aspect of the forest's healing. He was no longer an outsider, an adventurer seeking answers. He had become a part of the forest, as much a part of it as the trees, the rivers, and the wind. Each day, he ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, observing its changes, feeling its pulse. Max spent hours walking along the newly formed riverbanks, watching as the water flowed more freely, once again carving its path through the land. He noticed how the trees that had once been twisted and gnarled now stood tall and proud, their branches reaching for the sky as new life sprouted from their roots. Flowers, once thought lost forever, were blooming again, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of the forest. He had also begun to notice the return of animals. Small creatures at first, darting among the underbrush, scurrying along the forest floor. Birds had begun to return, singing from the branches of the trees, their songs a harmonious blend of joy and hope. The forest was coming back to life, but it would take time, a slow and steady recovery. At night, Max would sit by the fire, the stones glowing softly in his hands, and think about the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the storm, the fierce force of nature that had once ravaged the land, and how it had become a catalyst for the forest's healing. He had learned so much in the past days, about the forest, about himself, and about the delicate balance of life. The storm had not been an enemy to fight, but a part of the forest's soul, a necessary part of the land's cycle. In understanding the storm, he had understood the forest's pain, and in doing so had transformed it. But there was still much to be done. The forest was not yet fully healed. The work of restoration, of balancing the land, would take years, perhaps even generations. Yet, for the first time, Max felt at peace. He knew that the land would recover, that with patience and care, the balance would return. The storm had passed, and with it, the forest's heart had been awakened. It was a new dawn. One evening, as Max sat by the fire, the spirit of the forest appeared to him once more. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her ethereal form glowing softly in the twilight. "You have done well, Max," she said, her voice gentle but full of pride. "The forest is healing because of you. But remember, this is only the beginning. The land will need your care, your guidance, for many years to come. You are its protector now, and it is your duty to ensure that the balance remains. But do not forget that you are also a part of this land, as much as the trees, the animals, and the winds." Max looked up at her, his heart full of gratitude. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I will watch over the forest, and I will continue to help it heal. This is my purpose now." The spirit nodded, her eyes filled with wisdom and kindness. "And you will not be alone," she said. "The forest will always be with you. Its heart is connected to yours, and as long as you listen, you will always know what needs to be done." Max smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had found his place in the world. The storm had taught him that healing was not a quick fix. It was a slow, steady process that required patience, understanding, and care. And now, with the forest beginning to recover, Max knew that he had the strength to carry this responsibility for as long as it took. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The forest grew stronger, more vibrant with each passing day. Max continued his work, ensuring that the balance was maintained, guiding the land as it found its way back to vitality. He had become not just the forest's protector, but its companion, its friend. And as he stood one morning, watching the sun rise over the horizon, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, Max felt the forest's heart beat in time with his own. The storm had passed, but the land was stronger for it. The balance had been restored, and with it a new beginning. The forest was no longer broken. It was whole again. And Max, the protector of the forest, stood at its heart, ready to guide it into a future filled with hope, life, and endless possibilities. And with that, Max's journey in the forest was just beginning. The forest's healing had started, and as the protector, Max would be there every step of the way, watching over the land and ensuring its balance was maintained. The storm had passed, but a new dawn had arrived, and with it, the promise of a bright future. There was a quiet meadow nestled between rolling hills, a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The air was always fresh here, filled with the scent of wildflowers, the soft buzz of bees, and the rustling of trees swaying gently in the breeze. The sky above was always a gentle shade of blue, and the sun, though warm, never seemed to be too hot. It was the kind of place where one could lose track of the hours, where peace settled over you like a blanket. At the edge of the meadow, a small stream wound its way through the grass, its water sparkling in the sun. The stream was clear, its surface rippling gently as it made its way down the valley, winding past smooth rocks and through clusters of ferns. The sound of the water flowing was constant, like a soft lullaby that helped to calm the mind and soothe the soul. There were birds here, too, their songs drifting through the air like delicate threads. Some perched in the trees, singing in harmony with the breeze. Others flitted about, their wings a blur of color against the blue sky. The meadow was a haven for wildlife, a peaceful sanctuary where animals could live without fear. One day, a traveler arrived at the meadow, weary from a long journey. They had been walking for days, crossing mountains and valleys, chasing the promise of something peaceful, something that could offer rest to their tired mind and body. They had heard whispers of this meadow, of its serenity and the quiet beauty that lived there. The moment they stepped into the meadow, they felt the weight of the world fall away. The sounds, the sights, the gentle feeling of being in this sacred place. It was like nothing they had ever known before. The traveler paused for a moment, taking in the vast expanse of green and the endless blue sky above. They could feel the tension in their body begin to ease. The quiet of the meadow wrapped around them like a soft hug, and they took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh, clean air. The traveler knew they had found the peace they had been searching for. The traveler continued to walk, their feet crunching softly on the grass beneath them. The meadow seemed to stretch on forever, its beauty ever present. But there was something intriguing just ahead. A narrow path, barely visible, wound its way through a grove of ancient trees. The trees were tall and graceful, their trunks thick with age, their leaves a brilliant mix of green and gold. The air here was cooler, shaded by the canopy above, and the sunlight filtered through the branches, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Without thinking, the traveler followed the path, drawn forward by an unknown pull. The gentle rustling of leaves above them was soothing, almost like a whisper, and the faint sound of the stream in the distance added to the calming atmosphere. It was a quiet, almost sacred place, where the world outside seemed to disappear entirely. As they walked deeper into the grove, the traveler noticed that the path seemed to open up every now and then into small, peaceful glades. In these pockets of space, wildflowers grew in vibrant clusters, their colors ranging from soft lavender to deep crimson. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their sweet scent mixing with the earthy smell of the forest floor. The traveler sat on a smooth rock in one of these glades, closing their eyes for a moment. The sounds of the forest, the distant babbling of the stream, and the occasional chirp of a bird created a symphony of nature's peace. For the first time in a long while, the traveler felt their mind quiet, the constant hum of thoughts fading into the background. The trees surrounding the glade seemed to stand as silent sentinels, their branches swaying in harmony with the wind. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and earth, grounding the traveler even further in the present moment. They smiled, realizing that they had arrived at the place they had been searching for, a sanctuary where the world's worries seemed far away. As the traveler sat in the glade, a soft glow began to settle over the meadow. The sun, once high in the sky, had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows and bathing the land in warm, golden light. The breeze that had been gentle all day now carried a crispness, signaling the approach of evening. A sense of anticipation filled the air, as though the land itself was preparing for something special. The traveler stood and began to walk back toward the meadow, feeling the quiet peace of the forest behind them. The meadow now looked different in the fading light. The colors were richer, more vibrant, and the air had taken on a coolness that felt refreshing against their skin. The stream sparkled more brightly as the sunlight caught the water, turning it into a ribbon of silver. As they walked, the sounds of the meadow seemed to deepen, becoming more pronounced as the world quieted around them. The rustling of the leaves, the chirping of crickets, and the call of distant birds formed a gentle melody that seemed to be part of the very rhythm of the earth. The traveler paused for a moment to listen, feeling completely at peace. The horizon now blushed with the soft colors of twilight, and soon, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The traveler stood for a moment, gazing upward. It was as if the stars had come to greet them, twinkling with an ancient wisdom that had been passed down through the ages. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet stillness of the night. The traveler found a soft patch of grass and lay down, staring up at the sky. The stars seemed to stretch on forever, each one a tiny spark of light in the vast expanse of the universe. They felt small in comparison, but also a part of something much larger, something timeless. The night sky, with its infinite beauty, was both humbling and comforting, a reminder that everything was connected, from the tiniest flower in the meadow to the stars overhead. The gentle breeze that had been a constant companion throughout the day now seemed to carry a deeper sense of calm, as if it was whispering an invitation. The traveler closed their eyes, letting the sounds of the meadow and the stars above lull them into a peaceful sleep. The traveler's sleep was deep and peaceful, the kind of sleep that only comes when the body and mind are completely at rest. In this quiet place, surrounded by the beauty of the meadow and the calm of the night, the boundaries between waking and dreaming seemed to blur. As they slept, their dreams were filled with gentle images of the world around them. The sway of the trees, the sparkle of the stream, and the vast, starry sky above. It was as if they were no longer separate from the world, but an integral part of it, a small but important piece of the larger whole. The dream continued, the traveler walking through the meadow and the forest, guided by the soft light of the fireflies and the peaceful presence of the figures. Time no longer seemed to matter. There was no need for hurry, no need to reach a destination. All that existed was the quiet beauty of the moment, the serenity of being. As the dream unfolded, the traveler found themselves standing at the edge of the forest, where the trees parted to reveal an open field bathed in soft, silver moonlight. The land before them stretched far and wide, with rolling hills covered in a blanket of soft grass. In the distance, the gentle curve of a mountain range rose against the horizon, its peaks dusted with snow. The air here felt different, cooler, fresher, with a slight mist hanging just above the ground. The traveler took a deep breath, inhaling the pure, clean air, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over them. It was as though every step they took was in perfect harmony with the world, the earth beneath their feet, and the sky above. They began to walk toward the open field, the soft grass brushing against their skin as they moved. The sound of the wind picked up, but it wasn't like any wind the traveler had ever heard before. It was soft and soothing, like the caress of a gentle hand. It seemed to whisper, as if it were speaking a language known only to the land itself. The traveler paused, listening intently. The wind seemed to be telling a story, one of ancient times, of the ebb and flow of seasons, of the quiet patience that the land held within its bones. Rest, the wind seemed to say. Listen to the rhythm of the earth. All things come in their own time. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment, feeling the wind as it wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. The words, though not spoken aloud, seemed to settle deep within their soul. The world was not something to be rushed. It was a place of quiet rhythms, of moments that unfolded slowly, like the changing of the seasons or the blooming of a flower. There was no need to chase anything, no need to strive. All that was needed was to be present, to embrace the peace that was already here. As the wind whispered its secrets, the traveler felt a sense of deep connection with the land. It was as though they had always belonged here, as though they were part of this ancient, timeless place. There was no sense of separation, no sense of being an outsider. They were one with the earth, the trees, the stars, and the sky. Everything was intertwined, and they were right where they were meant to be. The traveler continued walking, the soft wind still whispering its stories, guiding them along the path. With each step, they felt lighter, more at ease, as if the weight of the world was slipping away, leaving only the stillness and peace of the present moment. As the traveler walked through the field, they noticed a small, hidden path that seemed to beckon them toward it. It was overgrown with ivy and soft moss, its entrance framed by a pair of ancient stone pillars, worn smooth by time. The path was narrow and winding, leading into a dense thicket of trees and flowers. It was a place that felt secret, as if it had been waiting for the traveler to find it all along. Intrigued, the traveler stepped onto the path, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound as they moved deeper into the thicket. The air here was different from the open field, warmer, richer, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and sweet earth. The trees overhead seemed to reach out toward one another, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that filtered the sunlight, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. As the traveler walked, they noticed that the flowers here were unlike any they had seen before. Each bloom seemed to glow with its own inner light, their petals soft and delicate, like whispers of color in the air. The flowers were in every shade imaginable: vibrant purples, soft pinks, deep blues, and rich oranges. They swayed gently in the breeze, their fragrance intoxicating, calming the mind with each breath. The path twisted and turned, leading the traveler deeper into the garden. They could hear a faint sound, like the soft murmur of voices, carried on the wind. It was not a sound made by any person, but rather the soft hum of the flowers and trees, as if they were speaking to one another in a language known only to the earth itself. The traveler stopped for a moment to listen, the hum filling the air around them, and felt a deep sense of peace wash over them. Soon, the path opened up into a small clearing, and there, in the center, stood a stone bench. It was worn with age but still solid, and it seemed to invite the traveler to sit. The traveler did so, feeling the cool stone beneath them and gazing out over the garden. The flowers and trees were beautiful, but there was something else about this place. A quiet magic, a sense that this garden held memories, forgotten dreams, and unspoken wishes. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment, breathing in the scents of the garden, feeling the warmth of the sun on their skin. It was as if time had slowed here, or perhaps it had simply stopped. In this place there was no need to rush. There was only the present, the peace of the moment, and the knowledge that all was well. The hum of the garden seemed to grow louder, more distinct. The traveler felt as though the garden was speaking directly to them, sharing its ancient wisdom. It was a place of forgotten dreams, of long-lost hopes, and the quiet realization that everything, in its own time, would find its way. The traveler sat on the stone bench, feeling the stillness of the garden seep into their bones. The hum of the flowers and trees around them was no longer distant. It was a part of them, a soft and continuous presence that seemed to speak directly to their heart. The warmth of the sun on their skin, the coolness of the stone beneath them, and the fragrance of the flowers filled the senses in a way that made everything feel perfectly balanced. Time had no meaning here. It was as if the traveler had slipped into a world where the days flowed gently into one another, unhurried and unbothered by the usual pressures of life. With a deep breath, the traveler stood up and began to wander through the garden, their feet soft against the earth. They were drawn toward a small, hidden alcove at the far end, where a magnificent tree stood. It was old, its trunk gnarled and twisted, but it seemed to radiate an ancient energy, its branches stretching high above in a canopy of thick leaves. The tree was unlike any other in the meadow or the forest. Its bark shimmered with a soft, silvery glow, as if it had been touched by the stars themselves. Curiosity pulled the traveler closer, and as they neared the tree, they noticed that its roots spread wide and deep into the earth, wrapping around smooth stones and winding through the soil like a network of veins. At the base of the tree there was a small pool of clear water, so still that it looked like a perfect mirror. The traveler knelt beside it and gazed into its depths, feeling a sense of serenity wash over them. In the reflection, they saw not just their own face, but the garden behind them, the flowers, the trees, and the vast sky stretching overhead. It was as if the water had captured the essence of everything around them, holding it in perfect stillness. For a moment, the traveler felt as if they had become part of the landscape itself, an extension of the garden, the sky, the earth. There was no separation. Everything was one. The traveler dipped their fingers into the water, and the surface rippled gently, sending a series of soft waves across the stillness. As the water calmed once more, they felt a sense of something profound and comforting stir deep inside them. It was as though the garden itself had shared a secret with them, a reminder that peace, like the water, flowed gently through all things, waiting to be rediscovered whenever it was needed. The traveler stood up, feeling lighter, their heart full. They turned away from the tree and began walking back toward the center of the garden. There was no hurry, no need to rush. The journey, they realized, was not about reaching a destination but about experiencing each step along the way, appreciating the small, quiet moments that made up the fabric of life. The traveler wandered slowly through the garden, their feet tracing the winding path back toward the entrance. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, and the sky above was painted in soft shades of lavender and deep indigo. The moon had risen high, casting its silver light over the garden, turning everything it touched into something ethereal and otherworldly. The flowers now seemed to glow faintly, their colors becoming more subdued but no less beautiful in the soft moonlight. The traveler's steps were slow, each one taken with a quiet awareness, as if every motion was part of a delicate dance with the night. The cool air, now tinged with the scent of evening, wrapped around them like a comforting cloak. The wind had settled into a gentle breeze, and the only sounds that filled the space were the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a distant cricket. As the traveler reached the end of the path, where the garden met the edge of the forest, they noticed something new, a soft glow that seemed to emanate from within the trees themselves. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but as they stepped closer, it grew brighter. The trees ahead of them, once shadowed and quiet, were now alive with the light of fireflies that flitted through the air like tiny stars. Drawn by the light, the traveler stepped onto a new path that led them deeper into the forest. The trees here were tall and ancient, their branches heavy with age and wisdom. The light from the fireflies danced across the bark, creating an enchanting tapestry of glow and shadow. It was as though the forest had come alive, embracing the night in all its mystery and beauty. The traveler continued down the path, feeling as though they were being guided, not by the fireflies themselves, but by the very spirit of the forest. The moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, grounding the traveler with each step. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. The gentle glow from the fireflies illuminated the way, and as the traveler walked, they felt a profound sense of connection to the land, to the trees, and to the very heart of the forest itself. The world outside seemed to fade away, and in this moment, there was only the forest and the peaceful serenity it offered. The deeper the traveler ventured into the forest, the more the air seemed to hum with a quiet, ancient energy. The fireflies, now more numerous than before, filled the air like a constellation of stars come to life. Their soft glow illuminated the path ahead, and with each step, the traveler felt a stronger sense of peace, as if the forest was wrapping them in its protective embrace. The trees around them were ancient, their trunks thick and covered in layers of moss that felt soft to the touch. The branches above were so high and intertwined that they formed a natural canopy, sheltering the traveler from the world outside. It was as though they had stepped into a different realm, a space where time moved differently, slower and more deliberate, like the pulse of the earth itself. As they walked, the traveler noticed the silence of the forest. It wasn't an eerie silence, but a comforting one, as if every creature within it was still and at rest. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze and the soft murmur of the wind that passed through the trees. There was no hurry here, no need to rush. The forest, with its quiet stillness, seemed to understand the value of patience. After a while, the path began to narrow, the trees becoming denser around them. The glow from the fireflies grew brighter, their lights now filling the air like floating lanterns. It was then that the traveler saw it. A small clearing ahead, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The trees parted just enough to reveal the center of the forest, and in the middle stood an enormous, ancient tree. Its trunk was vast and gnarled, its roots spreading outward like the veins of the earth. The branches reached high, tangled and alive with the gentle movement of the wind. The traveler was drawn toward the tree, feeling an overwhelming sense of reverence. As they approached, they noticed that the ground around the tree was covered in soft moss and delicate wildflowers, their petals pale in the moonlight. The air here was thick with a quiet energy, and the traveler could feel it pulsing, like the very heartbeat of the forest. They knelt before the tree, placing a hand on the rough bark. It was warm beneath their touch, as though the tree itself was alive, breathing. The traveler closed their eyes, feeling a deep connection to the tree, to the forest, and to the land around them. They could feel the centuries of wisdom that had flowed through the tree, the stories it held in its branches and roots, and the sense of timelessness that surrounded it. In that moment, the traveler understood that they were not alone. The forest, the tree, the earth, they were all part of something greater, a vast and interconnected web of life that stretched beyond the limits of their understanding. And in this space they were welcome, they were safe, and they were home. The traveler remained kneeling before the great tree, feeling the warmth of its bark beneath their fingertips and the soft pulse of energy that seemed to radiate from it. Time had lost all meaning in this sacred place, and the only thing that mattered was the connection they felt with the tree, the forest, and the earth itself. The air around them was thick with the weight of centuries, each one etched into the very essence of the forest. The tree was not just a living thing, it was a witness to time itself, holding within it the stories of the land, the creatures, and the people who had come before. The traveler closed their eyes, letting their senses open to the world around them. The gentle rustling of leaves above, the distant hum of life in the forest, and the faint whispers of the wind all blended together into a peaceful symphony. It was as if the tree, and the forest it stood in, were speaking to them in a language beyond words, one that was understood not by the mind, but by the soul. For the first time, the traveler understood what the wind had whispered to them earlier. Rest. It wasn't just a call to pause. It was a call to listen, to hear the wisdom of the world that surrounded them. The traveler realized that this wisdom was not found in the rush of the outside world, in the constant need to achieve or to move forward. It was found in the stillness, in the moments of quiet reflection, and in the ability to be present in the now. The traveler slowly stood, feeling the weight of the tree's wisdom settling within them. They turned to look around, and for the first time they truly saw the forest, not just as a collection of trees, but as a living, breathing entity. The trees weren't simply growing. They were part of a greater cycle, a rhythm that stretched across time, each tree a chapter in a never-ending story. The flowers and the grasses, the animals and the insects, all played their part in the dance of life, each one contributing to the harmony of the land. The traveler took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace fill their heart. They understood, in that moment, that they were part of this dance as well. Just as the trees grew and the rivers flowed, they too were part of the natural world, a small but important thread in the fabric of life. The traveler smiled, feeling the weight of the world's worries lift from their shoulders. There was no need to chase anything, no need to fight for a place. They were exactly where they needed to be. The moon above had climbed higher in the sky, its light bathing the forest in a soft, ethereal glow. The fireflies continued to drift lazily through the air, their light flickering like tiny stars in the night. The traveler took one last look at the great tree before turning to follow the path back through the forest, the lessons of the land etched deeply into their heart. As the traveler began their journey back along the forest path, The sense of peace that had filled their heart seemed to linger, settling deep within them. The cool night air, the soft glow of the fireflies, and the ancient wisdom of the trees had all become part of their being. Each step they took felt lighter, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from their shoulders, and with each breath, they inhaled the serenity of the forest. The path through the woods seemed different now, more familiar, less mysterious, but no less beautiful. The trees, still bathed in moonlight, seemed to reach out to greet the traveler, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The fireflies flitted around them, illuminating the way, their soft light guiding the traveler through the night. The stars above were bright and clear, scattered across the sky like diamonds, casting their silvery glow over everything below. As the traveler walked, they thought about all they had experienced. The peaceful garden, the ancient tree, the wisdom that had been shared with them. It was as though the forest had shown them something important, something they had forgotten in the rush of life. The power of stillness, the importance of being present, and the deep connection they shared with the world around them. They had come to realize that life was not about reaching a destination, but about embracing the journey, and about finding peace in the quiet moments along the way. The forest, with all its ancient beauty and timeless rhythms, had become a reflection of their own soul, calm, grounded, and full of quiet wisdom. The traveler now understood that peace was not something to be found somewhere out there, but something that lived within them, always waiting to be discovered when they needed it most. It was a lesson that the forest had taught without words, simply by showing the traveler the beauty of the present moment. As the path began to narrow and the trees started to thin out, the traveler could see the edge of the forest ahead. The gentle glow of the fireflies faded, and the cool night air grew quieter, more still. The traveler stepped out of the forest and into the open meadow once again, where the grass swayed gently in the breeze and the stars above twinkled brightly. The moon was still high in the sky, casting its soft light across the land. The meadow, so familiar now, felt like home. The traveler took a deep breath, inhaling the night air, and smiled. The journey had not been one of physical distance, but of inner discovery. The peace they had found in the forest, in the ancient tree, and in the quiet of the night was now a part of them, a gift that they could carry with them, wherever they went. As the traveler made their way back to their resting place, they felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had undertaken. It had been a journey of self-discovery, of finding peace in the stillness, and of reconnecting with the natural world. And as they lay down to rest, the gentle hum of the night seemed to sing them a lullaby, lulling them into a peaceful sleep, knowing that the wisdom of the forest would always be there when they needed it. As the traveler settled into a soft bed of grass under the vast, starry sky, their body relaxed into the earth, and their mind began to drift like a leaf on a calm river. The cool night air wrapped around them, and the sound of the gentle breeze through the trees became a lullaby that soothed every restless thought. Above them, the stars twinkled like distant lanterns, their soft glow reflecting in the traveler's eyes as they gazed upward, their minds slowly drifting into a peaceful, dream-filled slumber. The stars above seemed to grow brighter as the traveler's consciousness faded into sleep. Each one felt like a distant memory, a guiding light in the darkness of the unknown. The more they gazed at the heavens, the more it felt as if the stars were speaking to them, not with words, but with feelings, emotions, and subtle shifts in the air. It was as if the stars themselves were aware of the traveler's presence, welcoming them into a new realm, a space beyond time, where dreams and reality intertwined. As the traveler's eyes closed, they felt themselves being lifted gently into the sky, rising above the meadow, above the trees, and into the vastness of the night. The sensation was not one of fear, but of serene weightlessness, as though they were floating freely, untethered by the physical world. They were moving through the stars, passing by constellations they had only ever seen in books, watching the soft glow of distant planets twinkle as they sailed through the night. There was no need to hurry, no destination to reach. The travelers simply moved, carried on a breeze of celestial winds, feeling as though they were part of the cosmos itself. The stars whispered to them, not with words, but with the language of the universe, a silent communication that spoke of eternity, of infinite possibilities, and of the deep peace that resided at the heart of all things. As they drifted further into the cosmos, they found themselves surrounded by the glow of countless galaxies, each one swirling in its own delicate dance. Some were faint and distant, while others were close enough to feel their warmth. The traveler marveled at the beauty of it all, feeling as though they were standing on the edge of an endless horizon, where time itself seemed to dissolve. For a long time, the traveler simply floated, moving through the galaxies, feeling the gentle pull of the stars. They realized that this place, this dreamlike space, was a reflection of the stillness and peace they had found in the forest. It was as if the stars had drawn them here, guiding them to this quiet, infinite realm to remind them that the universe, much like the forest, was always there, quiet, patient, and full of wonder. As they continued to drift through the night sky, the traveler felt their heart swell with a sense of belonging. They were part of this vast, magnificent cosmos, and in this moment, they were exactly where they were meant to be. As the traveler floated through the endless expanse of space, the quiet beauty of the stars and galaxies continued to envelop them. The calm serenity they had felt in the forest now seemed to echo in this vast, celestial landscape. There was a stillness here, a peacefulness that stretched across the infinite reaches of space, where time seemed to have no hold. The traveler could feel a deep connection to everything around them, the stars, the planets, the galaxies. All of it was part of one harmonious whole. As they drifted, a soft, ethereal light appeared ahead. At first, it was a faint glow, barely perceptible against the dark backdrop of space. But as the traveler moved closer, the light grew brighter and clearer, revealing itself to be a figure, tall and radiant, with an aura that seemed to shimmer like the stars themselves. The figure appeared to be composed of light, flowing and shifting like a living nebula, and its presence radiated a calm, reassuring energy. The traveler was not afraid. Instead, they felt a sense of peace wash over them, as though they were meeting an old friend. The figure's presence felt familiar, even though the traveler had never seen it before. It was as though the figure had been waiting for them, as if it had always been there, quietly watching over them. "Welcome," the figure spoke, its voice not audible in the traditional sense, but felt directly in the traveler's heart. The voice was soft and melodic, a sound that resonated with the very fabric of the universe. "You have journeyed far, and now you are here." The traveler's thoughts swirled with curiosity. "Where is here?" they asked, the question not needing words to be understood. The space around them, the light of the stars, the vastness of the cosmos. It all felt like a dream, a place beyond the physical world. "This is the realm between worlds," the figure replied, its form shifting like the swirling of galaxies. "It is the space where the dreams of the cosmos are born, where the energy of life flows between the stars. We are the guardians of this space, those who watch over the transitions between existence and non-existence, between the known and the unknown." The traveler felt a deep sense of wonder. They had always known that there was something greater than the world they had known, something beyond the veil of physical reality. But now, here in this space, the vastness of the universe seemed to open before them, revealing the interconnectedness of all things. "You are not alone," the guardian continued. "Every star, every planet, every being in the universe is part of a greater story. You too are part of this story. Your journey is but one thread in the tapestry of existence." The traveler felt the weight of these words, the depth of the truth they carried. They had always felt like just one small part of a larger whole, but here in this cosmic realm they understood. They were connected to everything, the stars, the planets, the galaxies, and all the beings that lived within them. The sense of separation that had once existed between them and the world faded, replaced by a deep sense of unity. The guardian's light shifted, and for a moment, the traveler saw a vision of their own life, moments from their past, from their childhood, from their journeys through the forest and the meadow. They saw the people they had met, the lessons they had learned, and the growth they had experienced. Each moment was woven into the larger tapestry of the universe, each one contributing to the ongoing flow of life. "This is your path," the guardian said, its voice gentle but filled with the weight of centuries. And it is a path that is uniquely yours. Every choice you make, every step you take, ripples through the fabric of the cosmos, creating new possibilities, new dreams, and new beginnings. The traveler felt a deep sense of gratitude, a profound appreciation for the journey they had undertaken. They understood now that every moment, no matter how small, was significant. Every step, every breath was part of the greater rhythm of the universe. The guardian smiled, the light around it shimmering like 1,000 stars. You are a part of this vast and beautiful cosmos, and you always will be. With that, the figure began to fade, its light dissipating into the endless reaches of space. The traveler was left floating in the calm, quiet beauty of the cosmos, their heart full of wonder and peace. They understood now that they were part of something much greater than themselves, a living, breathing universe that was full of infinite possibilities. The traveler felt the presence of the guardian slowly fade, like the last fading embers of a fire that had burned brightly in the dark. The stillness of the cosmos lingered around them, but there was a sense of movement now, as if the universe was gently guiding them back towards something familiar. The vast expanse of stars, the galaxies, and the infinite unknown stretched around them, but the traveler began to sense the pull of the earth below, the familiar ground, the soft wind, the rustling of leaves. As they slowly descended, the celestial realm began to dissolve into a soft mist, the stars fading into the background, replaced by the quiet serenity of the forest once again. The traveler's body, which had felt weightless and free among the stars, now felt grounded, tethered back to the earth. The soft breeze they had once felt on their skin returned, carrying with it the sweet scent of pine and earth, the familiar smells of the world they had left behind. The faint rustling of leaves in the wind grew louder, and the moonlight once again bathed the landscape in its gentle glow. They were back in the meadow, standing on the soft, cool grass under the bright, full moon. The trees surrounding them were still tall and ancient, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The distant stars twinkled above, but they were now small, distant lights compared to the vastness the traveler had just witnessed. For a moment, the traveler stood still, taking in the beauty of the scene before them. They could feel the quiet hum of the forest, the rhythm of the earth beneath their feet, and the gentle pull of the night. It was as though nothing had changed, yet everything had shifted within them. The journey they had just undertaken, the vastness of space, the wisdom of the guardians, the interconnectedness of all things, had become a part of them, woven into the very fabric of their being. The traveler took a deep breath, inhaling the cool night air. They felt a sense of peace, a quiet knowing that the world around them was much larger, much more interconnected than they had ever realized. They were no longer just a solitary traveler, lost in the vast expanse of the world. They were part of the great cosmic dance, part of the rhythm of the stars, part of the eternal flow of life. The moon above shone brighter now, casting its silvery light over the meadow and the forest. The fireflies that had once lit the path through the woods were now scattered across the open field, their tiny lights twinkling like stars fallen to the earth. The traveler smiled, feeling the warmth of the night, the peace of the world, and the quiet joy that came from knowing they were exactly where they needed to be. As they walked back through the meadow, the traveler knew that they would never be the same. The journey they had taken, through the vastness of space and into the heart of the forest, had opened their eyes to the deep beauty of the world. They had discovered the stillness within themselves, the connection to the stars, and the quiet wisdom that lived within the earth. And now, they carried that wisdom with them, knowing that no matter where their path led, they would always be a part of the greater rhythm of the cosmos. As the traveler moved through the meadow, the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the sky with shades of soft pink and gold. The stars faded gently into the morning light, their flicker now a distant memory, like the whispers of a dream. The night had been long, but it had left its mark. Like a quiet echo, the wisdom of the stars, the guardians, and the forest filled the traveler's heart. Each step they took felt deliberate, grounded. The path ahead, familiar as it was, seemed to carry a deeper meaning now. Every blade of grass, Every rustling leaf, every quiet hum of life seemed to hold its own secret, a soft whisper of understanding waiting to be heard. The traveler could hear it now, not in words, but in the quiet spaces between the sounds of the forest, in the still moments where time seemed to stop, if only for a second. It was as if the world itself was sharing its story, unfolding a deeper truth that could only be understood in the silence. They paused for a moment at the edge of the meadow, looking back at the forest, the towering trees, and the land stretching out into the distance. It was hard to explain, but the traveler felt a deep sense of belonging, as though they had come full circle. The world, with its vastness and beauty, was not something to be conquered or understood in the traditional sense. It was something to be experienced, felt, and appreciated in its quiet, eternal presence. The forest had shown them this truth, that peace and wisdom didn't need to be sought in far-off places or in grand gestures. They were present in every moment, in every breath, in every quiet pause. The universe itself was constantly whispering, but it was only in the stillness that one could truly hear. The journey, whether through the forest, the stars, or through the quiet moments of life, was always about listening. Listening to the subtle messages that the world offered, patiently and without rush. Each traveler took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill their lungs. With the rising sun, the world seemed to come alive, the first rays of light stretching across the meadow, bathing everything in a soft golden glow. The birds began to sing, their sweet melodies filling the air, and the leaves of the trees rustled as the wind picked up. It was a new day, a new beginning, and yet the traveler felt no urgency, no need to rush forward. They were content to simply be here in this moment with the knowledge that the world would unfold as it should, in its own time. The traveler began to walk again, this time with a deeper sense of calm. They knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but they also knew that they had everything they needed within them. The wisdom of the forest, the stars, and the guardians was now part of their soul, guiding them forward with quiet strength. They would carry this peace with them, wherever they went, knowing that the stillness of the universe would always be there, waiting to be heard. The traveler moved with a sense of clarity that had eluded them in the past. With each step, the world seemed to shift, becoming sharper in focus, the colors of the meadow more vibrant, the sounds of the forest more distinct. The cool morning air brushed against their skin, and the scent of damp earth and wildflowers filled their senses. Everything was exactly as it should be, and yet, there was a subtle change, an almost imperceptible transformation that had taken place within them. As they walked, they noticed the sky beginning to clear, the last remnants of the night lifting from the horizon, giving way to the brilliant blue of the day. The sun climbed higher, its golden light spilling over the landscape, casting long shadows on the ground and illuminating the path ahead. It was a perfect morning, peaceful, still, and full of promise. And yet, despite the beauty of the day, the traveler couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something had shifted, both within them and in the world around them. It was as if the universe itself had reflected something back at them, something they had not fully understood before, but now saw with crystal clarity. They looked up at the sky, its deep blue expanse stretching endlessly above them. The traveler was struck by how much like a mirror it seemed, a vast, infinite reflection of the world beneath. The clouds drifted lazily across the sky, their soft edges glowing in the light of the morning sun. The trees below, with their dark green leaves and tall, strong trunks, seemed to reach up to touch the sky, as if seeking to unite the two realms, earth and heavens. In a dance as old as time itself, it occurred to the traveler that the sky had always been there, just as the earth had. And just as they had always walked upon the earth, they had always looked to the sky. Yet now, for the first time, the sky felt more than just a backdrop to their life. It felt like a companion, a mirror reflecting the depths of their inner world. In its vastness, they could see their own infinite potential, their own capacity for growth and change. In its endless blue, they saw the possibility of endless horizons, of journeys yet to come, of dreams that had yet to be realized. It was a humbling thought. The sky, in its grandeur, had been a constant presence, always there, always watching, and yet it had never felt so close before. It was as if the traveler had gained a new understanding of the world, an understanding that went beyond the physical, beyond the day-to-day struggles and triumphs. The sky was a reflection of the traveler's own soul, vast, uncharted, and full of possibility. The traveler paused for a moment, taking it all in. The earth beneath their feet, the sky above their head, the wind in the trees, the birds soaring through the air. All of it was connected. All of it was part of the same great, infinite cycle. And they, too, were part of it. They were not separate from the world. They were the world, an expression of it, a living, breathing reflection of the beauty, the complexity, and the mystery of life itself. As the traveler continued on their way, they felt a deeper sense of peace, a quiet certainty that they were where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. The sky had reflected back their own truth, their own purpose, and in doing so, had given them the courage to move forward with quiet confidence. The path ahead remained unknown, but the traveler no longer felt lost. They were ready for whatever the universe had in store, knowing that they would face it with open arms, guided by the same quiet wisdom that had carried them this far. As the traveler continued on their journey, the path slowly began to wind downward, leading them toward the gentle sound of flowing water. The familiar rustling of the trees and the chirping of birds faded into the background, replaced by the soft, soothing murmur of a river that wound through the landscape like a quiet thread of silver. It was a sound that called to the traveler, pulling them closer, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. The path opened up into a wide clearing, where the river wound its way through the valley, its clear waters sparkling in the light of the rising sun. The traveler stood at the edge of the riverbank, watching as the water flowed effortlessly, twisting and turning over the smooth stones, carrying with it the echoes of distant lands. The river seemed to speak, its voice soft and rhythmic, as though it was sharing its ancient story with the world. There was something timeless about the river, something that spoke of a journey much greater than any one person's. The water that flowed so gently and steadily had been here long before the traveler, and it would be here long after. It was a reminder of the cycles of life, of the constant flow of time, and of the unbroken connection between all things. The traveler knelt by the river, dipping their fingers into the cool water. The river seemed to welcome them, its current flowing around their hand like a soft embrace. It was as though the river knew the traveler's heart, and in its depths, it held the wisdom of the world. Stories untold, memories forgotten, and dreams yet to be realized. There was no hurry here, no rush to reach the end. The river, like the stars and the forest, seemed to speak of the beauty of the present moment, of the quiet joy of simply being. As the traveler watched the river flow, they began to understand something they had not fully realized before. That life, much like the river, was a journey. It was not about reaching a final destination, but about embracing the flow, allowing the current to guide them, and trusting that everything they needed would come in its own time. Just as the river did not struggle against the rocks in its path, the traveler realized that they, too, could face the obstacles in their life with grace, letting go of the need for control and simply allowing things to unfold. The river's rhythm became a meditation, a gentle reminder that time flowed in its own way, and that every moment, every breath, was part of the greater current of life. The traveler sat by the water for a while, simply listening to its song, letting its peaceful energy seep into their bones. The water, like the world itself, was always in motion, always flowing, always changing, but always returning to the same peaceful rhythm. When the traveler finally stood up, they felt lighter, as though the river had washed away the remnants of their worries, leaving behind only clarity. The journey ahead was still unknown, but the traveler knew, deep in their heart, that they were not alone. They were part of something much larger, something timeless, and with that knowledge they felt ready to continue. The river would always be here, just as the forest and the sky would. The flow of life with its ebb and flow was constant, and the traveler, like the river, was part of it. There was no need to rush, no need to worry. Everything in its own time would come to pass. The traveler stood by the riverbank for a while longer, listening to the soft hum of the water as it flowed through the valley. The sun was now high in the sky, its warm rays casting a golden glow over the landscape. The world was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustling of the trees, the distant calls of birds, and the gentle murmur of the river. But as the traveler stood in the quiet peace of the moment, there was another sound that seemed to emerge, almost imperceptibly at first. It was the wind. The wind had always been there, whispering through the leaves, brushing against the skin, carrying with it the sense of distant places. But now, as the traveler stood there, the wind seemed to speak more clearly, as though it was sharing a secret, a message meant only for them. The soft rustling of the trees grew louder, the wind swirling in playful eddies, carrying with it a sense of mystery and wonder. The traveler closed their eyes, listening carefully. The wind was no longer just a background presence. It had become a voice, gentle and soothing, but filled with a quiet power. It carried with it the stories of the world, the ancient wisdom of the mountains, the memories of the forest, the songs of the river. It spoke of change and growth, of cycles that had existed long before the traveler and would continue long after. It was a reminder that everything was interconnected, that the same wind that blew through the trees in this valley also carried the scent of far-off lands, the whispers of places the traveler had yet to discover. The traveler took a deep breath, inhaling the cool, crisp air. There was something timeless about the wind, something that spoke of the passage of time and the eternal nature of the world. The wind had seen it all, births and deaths, beginnings and endings, the endless flow of life. It carried with it the stories of the earth, of the skies, and of the people who had come before. And now it was carrying the traveler's own story, weaving it into the greater fabric of existence. For a moment, the traveler felt a deep connection to everything around them. The trees, the river, the wind, and the earth. They were all part of the same story, the same eternal dance. The wind had no beginning and no end, just as life itself had no clear starting point or finish line. It was a continuous flow, a movement through time that was both fleeting and eternal. The traveler realized that they, too, were part of this flow. They were like the wind, constantly moving, constantly changing, but always connected to something greater. The wind whispered once more, its voice soft and reassuring, as though it was telling the traveler that everything was as it should be. There was no need to rush, no need to worry. The path ahead would unfold in its own time, and the traveler would be ready when it did. The wind had no destination. It simply moved, carrying with it the stories of the world. And so too would the traveler, moving with the wind, flowing with the current of life, embracing the journey as it came. When the traveler opened their eyes, they felt a deep sense of peace. The wind, like the river, had reminded them that there was beauty in the flow of life, beauty in the quiet moments, in the pauses between the breaths, in the spaces between the steps. The journey was not about reaching a destination, but about experiencing each moment, each whisper, each touch of the wind. The traveler stood for a while longer, letting the wind carry away any lingering doubts, any lingering fears. They were ready. They were part of the flow, part of the endless dance of life, and with that knowledge they felt free. The traveler left the riverbank with a heart lightened by the wind's whispers and the quiet wisdom of the forest. The world ahead still beckoned, full of mysteries yet to be unraveled. The day had grown warmer as they walked, the sun now casting long shadows over the land, painting the world in soft hues of amber and gold. The path meandered through the meadow, leading them toward a grove of ancient trees that stood sentinel at the edge of the forest. The trees here were different. While the ones before had been tall and strong, their branches reaching upward as if seeking the sky, these trees were more ancient, gnarled, twisted, their bark dark and weathered by centuries of life. They created a canopy of shadows, a soft, quiet darkness beneath their boughs. The air here was cool, and a sense of stillness hung in the air, as though this place held secrets that had been kept for generations. As the traveler stepped into the shade of the trees, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The light dimmed, and a quiet hush settled over the world. It was as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. The ground beneath their feet was soft, covered with a blanket of fallen leaves and moss. The air was rich with the scent of damp earth, and the distant sound of a babbling brook echoed faintly through the grove. Despite the quiet, there was a sense of energy here, a quiet intensity that the traveler could feel deep within their bones. The trees seemed to pulse with life, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling with a soft, whispering sound. The traveler stopped for a moment, standing still beneath the canopy, and listened. There was something familiar in the rustling leaves, something almost like a song, but one that spoke not in words, but in a language of sensation, a deep, unspoken connection to the earth itself. The shadows of the trees seemed to grow longer, stretching out across the forest floor like dark fingers, and the traveler found themselves drawn deeper into the grove. The deeper they went, the more the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, shifting and moving like living things. It was as though the forest was alive, aware of their presence, and the traveler could sense the weight of the history that lay within these trees. This was a place of ancient wisdom, a place where the past and the present intertwined, where memories of those who had walked this land before lingered in the very air. There, in the heart of the grove, stood a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a garden, wild and untamed, yet beautiful in its disarray. Flowers of every color and shape grew haphazardly, their petals swaying gently in the breeze. The air was thick with the fragrance of blooming roses, lavender, and jasmine, their sweet scent mingling with the earth's deep musk. The garden was a place of quiet magic, a place where time seemed to slow, where the boundaries between the worlds blurred and faded. The travelers stepped into the garden, their feet sinking softly into the moss-covered earth. Here, the shadows were deep, but they were not cold. The garden was alive with a quiet energy, a sense of peace that seemed to fill every corner, every petal, every leaf. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment, breathing in the sweet, fragrant air, feeling the world slow down around them. And in that moment, they understood. This was not just a garden of flowers and plants. It was a garden of memories, of stories untold, of lives lived and forgotten. It was a garden that held the echoes of all who had come before, a place where the past and present danced together in a harmonious rhythm. The Garden of Shadows was a place of reflection, a place where one could look into the depths of their own soul and find the truth they had long been searching for. As the travelers stood there, surrounded by the wild beauty of the garden, they felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had led them here, to this quiet sanctuary, this place of ancient wisdom and timeless beauty. And in this moment, they knew that the journey was not just about what they had seen, but about what they had learned, and what they would continue to learn, as the journey unfolded, step by step. The traveler lingered in the garden, the quiet hum of nature surrounding them like a cocoon of peace. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the garden, but they no longer felt ominous. Instead, they felt like gentle guardians, protecting the sanctuary that lay before them, holding the garden in a quiet embrace. The wind whispered through the leaves, soft and soothing, a final reminder of the constant flow of time. The fragrance of the flowers seemed to deepen, and with each breath, the traveler felt more rooted in the present moment. For the first time, they truly understood the lesson that the journey had been offering all along. It wasn't about reaching a specific destination, nor was it about accumulating knowledge or achieving something external. The truth, the peace, and the wisdom they had sought were not hidden somewhere in the distance. They had always been here within, waiting to be discovered. All the pieces of their journey, from the forest to the river, from the wind to the stars, had been leading them back to this simple truth: that everything they needed, all the strength, the wisdom, the peace, and the love already lived within them. The Garden of Shadows, with its wild, untamed beauty, was a reflection of this inner world. The disarray of the flowers, the shifting shadows, the quiet hum of life, it was all part of the same dance. There was no perfect order to be found here, no clear path to follow. And yet, the garden flourished, its beauty existing in its imperfections. It was a reminder that life, too, was imperfect and beautiful all the same. The journey, with all its twists and turns, its moments of confusion and clarity, was what made it meaningful. It was not about getting to an end, but about embracing the unfolding, the process, the flow. As the travelers stood in the heart of the garden, they felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for every step that had brought them here. The forest, the stars, the river, and the wind, they were all part of the same story, part of the same journey, just as they were a part of it. The world, in all its complexity, had offered its wisdom, its beauty, and its mysteries. And the traveler, having walked through it all, had come to understand the most important lesson. That peace, understanding, and love were not things to be sought outside. They were things to be found within. The sun, now lower in the sky, cast a soft golden light over the garden, the shadows growing long as the evening approached. The traveler took one last look at the wild beauty around them, feeling the stillness settle deep in their heart. It was time to move forward, but they knew now that no matter where their path took them, they would always carry the wisdom of the garden with them. The journey, after all, was never really about the destination. It was about the unfolding, the becoming, and the quiet knowing that they were part of something much larger than themselves. With a final, peaceful breath, the traveler turned and walked back toward the path. The forest, the river, the wind, and the sky. They would be with them always, guiding them, whispering their secrets. The world was vast, but it was also home. The traveler's heart was full, and as they took each step, they felt the quiet joy of knowing they were exactly where they needed to be. The journey had brought them here to this moment, and that was enough. It was the beginning of everything and the end of nothing. It was the eternal dance of life, ever unfolding, ever present, ever beautiful. And thus, the journey of the traveler, like all journeys, continued, quietly, peacefully, and with an open heart, ready for whatever lay ahead.